After being falsely branded as a villain, Elizabeth loses everything: her title, her family, and even her home. But instead of crying over her exile, she finally gets to live the life she's always wanted. Reborn with memories of her previous life, she starts introducing delicious modern recipes to a fantasy world that has never tasted anything like them. The story starts with a blonde woman, bound by iron chains in her hands behind her back. Today, the announcement declares that the unwelcomed villain will face punishment. Nearby, a young girl in a pink dress shrinks back, seeking comfort from the prince who holds her close. A group of heavily armored palace guards stands firmly in a row. The bound woman approaches the grand steps leading directly up to the royal throne where the ruler sits. The ruler gestures sharply from his throne, declaring the final judgment. He loudly sentences Elizabeth, the daughter of Duke Fontini, to lose her royal title and be banished from the kingdom forever. Elizabeth stands perfectly still, silently absorbing the decree. Whispers spread among the noble crowd gathered in the hall. They look on with satisfaction, muttering that the villain is finally getting what she deserves. In a quiet voice, she states that she accepts her punishment. The king scoffs with a quiet grunt, looking down upon her with complete disdain. From the base of the throne, the king demands to know if she has any final words. Elizabeth looks up directly, stating clearly that she has nothing to say. Internally, she reflects on the situation, realizing she carries no grudges and always knew things would turn out this way. A lively gathering fills the ballroom as high society guests mingle and chatter. Living as the daughter of a duke, her striking and attractive appearance often misled people. Because of her sharp looks, others frequently assumed she was a cruel bully. During a past ball, the crying girl clung tightly to the prince, loudly sobbing that Elizabeth had pushed her into the lake. Elizabeth stood a short distance away, silently observing the tearful accusation. Elizabeth could only think to herself that the girl had simply fallen into the water on her own. Because she was viewed as a rival to Princess Rosetta, constant misunderstandings painted her as a true villain. With the clatter of metal cuffs locking around her wrists, Elizabeth realized there was no escaping her final punishment. The heavy wooden wheel of a carriage rattles loudly against the rough ground. Sitting inside, 18-year-old Elizabeth, the daughter of Duke Fontini, begins her journey. Elizabeth looks out the small window, realizing she has been completely stripped of her noble title and is now just plain Elizabeth. Located far away in the neighboring kingdom of Remisa, a map marks a remote and quiet region known as Clareras. In this isolated place, the bells of Nortia Church ring out loudly across the land. The people who banished her believed she would spend the rest of her days in this place, completely overcome with despair. Outside in the bright sun, clean laundry hangs neatly on lines to dry while ducks quack loudly in the grass. That miserable fate was exactly what the high society thought would happen to her. In reality, Elizabeth feels completely free. Under a wide open sky, she smiles happily and throws her arms up. At this point you are probably wondering why getting banished made her happier, so subscribe, because her new life is nothing like anyone expected. Although she initially worried about what kind of life awaited her, she lacked absolutely no convenience at Nortia Church, the place of her banishment. Elizabeth walks happily through a grassy field, surrounded by playful, energetic children. When her family disowned her, most of her personal belongings were liquidated and sold off by the court. Because all of her consolation money was gifted directly to the church, the institution is now practically swimming in riches. As our girl walks outside the stone building, a cheerful sister leans far out of a window. The sister waves a cloth and calls out loudly to Elizabeth with a bright smile. A 21-year-old sister named Lucinda winks playfully from the window. She excitedly announces that tonight's dinner is roast pork with apples, eagerly looking forward to the meal. Another window rattles open as a 17-year-old sister named Roxanne peeks out. Looking annoyed, she tells Lucinda to show some self-control and stops her from acting like a filthy animal. The heavy front door creaks open as Elizabeth walks outside with the kids. Hearing the news, the children jump around happily, cheering loudly for the roast pork dinner. The 29-year-old head sister, Hilda, walks out while holding a basket. She smiles gently at the noisy group, noting how incredibly excited they all look. Hilda watches warmly as the kids continue to chant happily about eating meat. Elizabeth stands close behind them, watching the cheerful scene. Hilda decides that since the children have their hearts completely set on meat, they should go ahead and prepare the meal. She turns to Elizabeth and asks her to help out, to which Elizabeth quickly agrees. In the kitchen, the meat lets out a loud sizzle as it cooks. Elizabeth looks closely at the sizzling food, grateful for her open-hearted fellow sisters and her deeply understanding head sister. Our girl turns around with a bright smile, lifting a large tray. She happily tells Hilda that the food is officially browned to absolute perfection. Hilda stares quietly at the perfectly cooked dish with a surprised look on her face. With a soft chuckle, she mentions that noble women are typically never allowed inside their own kitchens. She lets out a nervous, shocked laugh as she carries the tray. Looking at the seasoned meat on the wooden cutting board, she reflects that it is entirely true, as she was never allowed anywhere near the kitchens back in the Duke's household. Hilda taps a container as she speaks, pointing out that Elizabeth has been at the church for a month now. She observes that from the very start, Elizabeth has been perfectly capable of dressing herself and genuinely seems to enjoy doing the laundry. She asks her the reason behind it. Elizabeth laughs nervously. She quickly makes an excuse, explaining that she has simply always wanted to try doing these things herself, though she secretly notes that she probably shouldn't mention her lifelong desire to hold a knife. Our girl quietly smiles to herself, thinking that her excuse is not actually a lie. She chops ingredients steadily on a cutting board. She reflects on how the Duke's household never let her live a normal way, even though these everyday chores were things she had done constantly in her previous life. She still holds distinct memories from her past life. The scene shifts back to her past. Before her reincarnation, she was a young businesswoman. She answers a call and introduces herself over the clattering sounds of the office. She identifies herself on the phone line as Sawatani from Dream Fan. The woman is Yuka Sawatani, a 24-year-old worker. While writing notes in a small booklet, she confirms they are moving forward with Plan A, reflecting that no one would ever believe she worked as a professional event planner in her previous life. Yuka gasps in shock into the receiver upon hearing urgent news. She panics after learning there is not enough physical space left for the venue, apologizing quickly and promising to arrive on site immediately. She dashes through a busy office room where other employees work at desk computers. She yells back to her coworkers that she is heading out right away and will not return until after 7 p.m., recalling that her event planning work covered everything from displays, exhibitions, mini-concerts, sports events, pop-up events, and major parties. Out on the city street, Yuka raises her arm high to hail a passing vehicle. She remembers her past home as a completely regular world where methods of transportation were never limited to simple walking or basic carriages, but also included trains, taxis, and large airplanes. A floor directory sign shows that the event planning company, Dream Fan, is located on the third floor. Slowly, all of the colleagues who had started at the exact same time dropped out, soon leaving her as the only newbie left. Yuka remembers that no new employees ever joined the company after her hiring. Water lets out a heavy slosh as it spills over the side of a container. Yuka reflects on how much she truly loved her job and felt the hard work was completely worth doing, but the day-to-day conditions were pretty terrible. She takes a long, quiet soak inside a hot bath to rest her tired body after an exhausting day. While relaxing in the warm water, Yuka counts off her fingers to review her event checklist. She confirms to herself that the tables, chairs, and projector are fully ready, and the tea and lunchboxes will arrive in the afternoon, concluding that everything is finally set. Yuka shifts in the tub and picks up a handheld gaming device protected by a plastic bag. She rustles the packaging as she prepares to play, finding a brief moment of comfort away from the pressures of her work life. She looks down at the glowing screen of her gaming device, which displays the title screen for a game called Princess Life. She holds on to a quiet wish that her event planning company might someday receive a request to manage a Princess Dawn event. Suddenly, a wave of panic hits Yuka as she sits up straight in the bath. She realizes with a shock that she forgot to place the t-shirts signed by the company president inside the official gift bags, frantically trying to calculate exactly how many they will need first thing in the morning. Letting out a deep, exhausted sigh, Yuka slips further down into the warm bath water to soothe her racing mind. Yuka stares blankly upward, mentally sorting through her remaining responsibilities. She reassures herself that the signs prohibiting audio and video recording were successfully created, silently hoping that every other detail for the upcoming event will turn out fine. With a soft blubbing sound, Yuka sinks fully beneath the surface as water bubbles rise around her. That very moment marks the sudden and final end of her previous life. A sudden splash breaks the water with a loud plop. Elizabeth reflects on how she realized she had been reincarnated when she was only 5 years old, following a specific water-related incident. People gathered frantically along the edge of the pond as a young child struggled in the water. Onlookers cried out in alarm, desperately calling for someone to rescue Elizabeth and shouting about the young lady. A man holds the young girl as she lets out a heavy cough, spitting up the water she swallowed. Nearby voices check on her, calling her a young lady and urging Elizabeth to hang in there. Our girl opens her eyes slightly. She tries to piece her memories together, vaguely recalling that she had just been drowning inside a modern bath, and wonders if someone managed to save her from it. With a sudden jump, the 5-year-old child gasps in absolute shock. At that exact moment, the memories of her entire past life came rushing back into her mind all at once. Sitting in a lavish room, the young Elizabeth lets out a soft gasp as she reads an open book. Nearby, adults whisper anxiously about her behavior, noting how she is handling a directory of nobles that she shouldn't be able to read yet, wondering if the shock from nearly drowning is causing her to use grown-up words. Elizabeth swishes through the pages and points her finger directly at the text. She looks closely at the names, confirming the location as the Kingdom of Moires and identifying her own lineage as the House of Duke Fontini on the continent of Dacristan. She realizes with complete certainty that this current life is actually taking place inside the exact world of the otome game she used to play in her previous life. The game is titled Princess Life, Dawn Confession, a romance story meant for girls where the main player acts as a princess of the Kingdom of Moires. The plot centers entirely around falling in love with handsome princes from various neighboring kingdoms. Elizabeth visualizes the cheerful heroine of the game, a girl destined to drown in the absolute affection of all the princes. She looks back down, realizing with total clarity that this beloved heroine is absolutely not her. The young Elizabeth sits small on a large chair, looking into a beautiful mirror inside her grand room. She suddenly realizes that her true role is the villainous rival, a character destined to be promptly banished at the very end of the game. Elizabeth panics and clutches her face, wondering in distress if her terrible fate is completely inevitable. She vividly imagines the game's depiction of herself, a haughty girl standing tall and laughing maliciously while the poor heroine cries nearby. She remembers how hard she tried to become a genuinely good person back then. Yet, she wonders whether it was the absolute force of the game's strict system or her own lack of awareness regarding her surroundings that led her astray. Back in the present, Elizabeth pounds her fist rapidly onto the kitchen table, creating a series of loud thumps. She finally understands that it was entirely impossible to escape from her inevitable banishment at the end of the game, realizing that is exactly why she ended up here. Right beside her, Hilda continues to calmly stir a bowl in the fully stocked kitchen, completely unaware of the heavy thoughts running through Elizabeth's mind. Hilda offers a warm, content smile as she looks over, explaining that she is genuinely happy she does not have to hold Elizabeth's hand through every single task. Because of this, she notes that how Elizabeth learned to do these chores does not actually matter to her. Our girl looks back at Hilda, silently noting that for such a pretty girl, the head sister is surprisingly calculative. Elizabeth looks down at the table, amazed by the sheer variety of food being prepared. She acknowledges to herself that while they do not possess a grand fortune and the meals are not overly luxurious, the spread is far grander than anything she ever expected from a self-sufficient church lifestyle. Stirring the pot with an absolute sense of satisfaction, she feels deeply content knowing that everyone at the church can finally eat delicious food to their heart's desire. In the kitchen, the busy preparation continues. Hilda stands steadily at the stove, carefully flipping a thick pancake mid-air with a smooth movement of her frying pan while Elizabeth stands closely by her side. Our girl giggles softly to herself, secretly thinking about how she has been quietly teaching the people in this world about the absolute joy of extra-thick pancakes, though she notes it is strictly a church secret. Hilda glances over, holding a plate of stacked food while wondering out loud what could possibly be so funny. She warmly tells Elizabeth that they have all the help they need in the kitchen, so she should feel free to go out and play with the children, to which Elizabeth quickly agrees. She turns and takes a steady step away from the wooden door as she heads outside. As she walks, she begins to internally reflect on the situation, quietly thinking to herself that the head sister might actually not be very fond of children. Elizabeth carries a large basket and happily hangs the fresh sheets up to dry, completely enjoying her peaceful chore. The large church bell lets out a series of loud, heavy rings across the landscape. Elizabeth continues her inner reflection, realizing that once she was reborn directly into the game, this world completely ceased to be fictional. She notes that the vast sky extends far past the edges of any screen, proving that this is a completely real country filled with actual people, where even the individuals who used to be non-playable characters now possess their own unique names and thoughts. Elizabeth thinks about her life as an inhabitant of this game, feeling relieved that it has been a while since she was finally set free from its original story and no longer forced into a villainous role. Elizabeth walks peacefully through a grassy field with the young children gathering around her. She reflects on her new life in the countryside, where she resides alongside 4 other sisters, the priest, and 10 children, viewing this peaceful change as her true chance for a third life. She smiles brightly as she playfully lifts one of the young boys up in the air. She happily realizes that she can now do whatever she wants, unlike the restrictive days when she lived as the daughter of a duke, and notes that using her past life memories to invent conveniences should be fine as long as no one finds out. Elizabeth gives the young boy a piggyback ride on her shoulders as they stand outside under the clear sky. Looking forward to the evening, Elizabeth asks the children what they should do to pass the time until dinner is ready. The young boy shouts out his enthusiastic suggestion, eagerly declaring that they should play carriage races. Elizabeth breaks out into a nervous sweat. She silently wonders to herself if that suggestion means she has to be the actual carriage, but quickly accepts the thought by deciding it is perfectly fine. Cheering loudly that here they go, she feels completely happy as she wholeheartedly enjoys her long-awaited freedom alongside the children running at her side. Our girl continues running along the open path while carrying the young boy, eagerly calling back to the children that they should race all the way to the gate. The kids shout back in excitement, urging her to wait up as they sprint right behind her. Elizabeth arrives at the grand stone entrance, while the young boy on her shoulders points excitedly toward the opening. She reflects on her peaceful situation, noting that she is now living quietly in a little-known region far away from both modern Japan and the stressful courts of the Kingdom of Mars. Suddenly, the cheerful mood shifts as a tall figure stands right in front of the stone doorway, blocking the entrance. Elizabeth pauses in shock, her fun life full of laughter suddenly interrupted as she gasps out in confusion, while the children standing behind her stare forward with wide, surprised eyes. A young man stands silently in profile, looking down with a serious and stern expression. He observes the surroundings as he keeps a careful watch over the stone building. Our girl realizes internally that she has definitely seen him before somewhere. She calls out to him. She walks up from the side and speaks directly to him, asking what urgent business brings the busy head knight all the way out to their remote church. The tall head knight stands firmly with his back turned, a massive sword strapped securely across his shoulders. Elizabeth looks toward the visitor with a sweating, worried face. She recognizes him as Leonid Guardhelm and wonders in distress what the so-called Sacred Lion sword could possibly be doing out here. She continues to observe Leonid, identifying him as her natural enemy who initially chased her out of court and someone she was never able to successfully befriend in the story. She reflects on his high status, noting that he is the fierce lord who directly commands the entire order of knights for the Kingdom of Mars. Elizabeth recalls her memories of the original Princess Life game, remembering that Leonid did not possess a proper romantic path, a distinct face, or any distinguishing features on the screen. He was simply treated as a nameless non-playable character, though he has now become completely real in this life. Letting out a heavy, tired sigh, Elizabeth reflects on how she always knew she was being constantly watched back in the capital city, but panics over the realization that the surveillance is apparently continuing even out here after she has been banished. Leonid turns around smoothly, his eyes locked forward with an intense expression. Elizabeth catches her breath in absolute shock. Elizabeth reflects anxiously to herself that this presence is incredibly scary, desperately remembering that she did not even do anything bad to warrant this kind of attention. Our girl speaks directly to the imposing visitor, clearly asking him to please state his business at their church. Leonid remains completely silent at first. He finally steps forward and breaks his silence to Elizabeth, beginning to say that he has something to declare. The guy grits his teeth, directly revealing to her that he followed her all the way here. Elizabeth gasps in complete realization, sweating nervously as she internally notes that it happened exactly as she had suspected. Elizabeth quickly turns her back to walk away, causing Leonid to stare forward in mild surprise. He immediately lunges forward and forcefully grabs her by the wrist, shouting out aggressively that she needs to wait because he will absolutely not let her run away, which causes a startled Elizabeth to yell back in protest. While Leonid aggressively holds Elizabeth by the wrist, the young children stand closely around them. The young boy walks right up behind Leonid and starts tapping against the scabbard of the massive sword. Looking up with complete awe, the boy excitedly comments on how cool it is to see a real knight. Elizabeth watches from a short distance away. They playfully urge him to show them how he fights and excitedly ask to see his massive sword. She feels a wave of pure disbelief, silently wondering to herself if the kids are actually getting attached to the fearsome sacred lion sword. Elizabeth continues her internal reflection, wondering if children are always this straightforward and questioning whether they can genuinely see right past his intimidating exterior. A couple of figures approach the scene, causing Elizabeth to wonder in mild surprise. Looking through the open stone entry, the 21-year-old sister named Lucinda and the 17-year-old sister named Roxanne stand side by side, watching the gathering with curious looks on their faces. Lucinda steps closer to the tall stranger. She lets out a quiet murmur of curiosity, looking intently up at Leonid while a young boy peeks out from right behind his long white cloak. She smiles warmly at Leonid, observing that she has never seen him around before. She politely offers him an invitation, suggesting that if he happens to be Elizabeth's guest, he should come inside right away to have dinner with everyone. Elizabeth reacts with a jolt of complete shock, panicking over the sudden idea of inviting an aristocratic gentleman directly into their quiet, holy place. Leonid turns his gaze away slightly, starting to say that the situation is not quite what it seems. Suddenly, Elizabeth jumps right in front of him, loudly declaring to the other sisters that this man is absolutely neither her acquaintance nor her personal guest. Elizabeth's aggressive rejection causes Leonid to draw back slightly. Undeterred by the tension, the enthusiastic children cling tightly to his white cloak, eagerly telling him that Sister Elizabeth's cooking is a bit weird but incredibly delicious, and proudly adding that they have lots of different kinds of bread waiting inside. He quietly echoes the mention of cooking. Hilda stands near the building's entrance, looking out toward the courtyard where a lively chatter echoes from the group gathered near the fence. Leonid raises his hand politely to decline the invitation, stating firmly that he will not bother them. They look at him in confusion, wondering what he means, while Elizabeth frantically yells out from the side. Hilda lets out a quiet sigh as she looks toward the group. Standing by the stone entry, she raises her voice to call out directly to the kids, telling the children to come inside now. She smoothly announces that they will prepare enough food for 2 out in the garden instead. Elizabeth panics in absolute shock as she screams out in complete disbelief at the head sister's sudden arrangement. Out in the quiet yard, a circular table stands laden with a large spread of various foods, pancakes, and a bottle of wine under the shadow of a large tree. Leonid sits silently at the table while his massive sword rests firmly against the tree trunk behind him. Elizabeth sits directly across from him under a gloomy shadow, sweating heavily as she frantically wonders to herself how the entire situation managed to turn out like this. Looking directly at the dishes, Leonid announces that they should officially begin to eat. He reaches down and picks up a loaded sandwich, lifting it up high to carefully inspect the ingredients. He takes a massive chomp out of the sandwich, completely focused on the meal. He continues to quietly chew his food, while Elizabeth sits across the way, staring at him. Leonid aggressively munches down on the sandwich, eating steadily with a serious expression. Elizabeth reflects on his rapid eating habits, secretly noting to herself that he looks like he is genuinely enjoying the food, and adds in surprise that he is already working his way through his third sandwich. She anxiously ponders whether there will be enough food left for him, internally noting that he might become angry if this small amount is all they are able to give him. On the table sits a large, neatly sliced cake-like bread topped with cream, fruit pieces, and a rich dark drizzle. Elizabeth silently looks over the dish, reflecting that it is a Japanese-style fruit sandwich she used to make during her previous life. She thinks about how much she had practiced with yeast and bread making in the past, leading to a sudden desire to try making even more varieties in the future. Elizabeth keeps a steady, watchful stare on Leonid as he gestures slightly with his empty hand while finishing his meal. Leonid swallows his final bit. He then firmly breaks the silence, announcing that from now on, he will come to check on her every single day. The shocking declaration causes Elizabeth to gasp out in complete disbelief. Elizabeth leans forward slightly to question the guest, asking if he is not heading home anytime soon. She notes that first of all, there is no inn located anywhere within Nortia village. Leonid looks up, firmly explaining that he actually bought a house on the outskirts of the area. He adds directly that he plans to simply travel from there for his duties. The declaration sends sudden chills down Elizabeth's spine, causing her to freeze. She anxiously wonders to herself exactly how long he plans to keep an eye on her out here. Later that evening, the scene transitions indoors as night deepens. Elizabeth sits quietly by the edge of a bed inside the brick room, beginning to softly explain her thoughts to one of the children. Our girl gently tucks the young girl into bed, calmly explaining that while the royal castle might look sparkly on the outside, it is actually wrapped in envy and jealousy. She warns that it sucks a person in and serves as a truly scary place you can never escape from, prompting the sleepy child to softly repeat the words envy and jealousy in curiosity. The child gently asks if that sounds like any fun. She points out that the Grand Castle is a place completely full of bothersome events. The young girl slowly closes her eyes, dozing off to sleep under the warm blanket. Before drifting off completely, she sleepily mutters a question about whether there was ever a prince for Elizabeth. Elizabeth looks down thoughtfully, softly confirming that her prince was indeed non-existent in that story. She visualizes a past scene from the otome game. She calmly reflects that her prince was simply not there in the palace. She remembers the painful memories of the past, visualizing how she used to walk away completely alone while a crowd of gossiping noble women stood in small groups, whispering and laughing maliciously behind her back. With a sudden whoosh of wind, the scene flashes back to the stern visitor outside. Elizabeth shivers slightly under her veil as she sits inside the dark room. While the young girl next to her snores peacefully in her sleep, Elizabeth wonders to herself why Leonid's face suddenly came to mind, internally noting that she gets scared just remembering him. Meanwhile, Leonid roars intensely with a fierce expression. He channels all of his physical strength as he prepares to make a powerful movement. With a massive thud, Leonid thrusts his heavy weapon down into the ground. He pants heavily from the sheer exertion, sweating as he looks over the dark landscape and reflects on the fact that he has finally made it to this destination. He proudly reflects on the fact that he finally talked to Elizabeth and even tasted her home cooking. Leonid looks to the side with a sweating, intense face, silently wondering if they have successfully stepped up from mere acquaintances to true friends. His face turns completely red as a burning sensation rushes over him. Letting out a wild, aggressive scream, Leonid forcefully swings his sword sideways through the dark forest. Deep inside the dark woods, a giant column of dust and smoke rises high into the night sky from the impact. A heavy rumble echoes all the way across the land, shaking the area surrounding a grand, multi-story mansion in the distance. Nearby at the Grand Count of Clarera's manor, a few birds flap their wings loudly as they fly through the starry night sky. Looking out from behind a large window frame, the 26-year-old Lord Christheart smiles knowingly, as he calmly observes the outside commotion. Christheart chuckles softly to himself inside his luxurious room, quietly noting that the wolves are certainly sounding very noisy tonight. In the background, an older butler holding a large water pitcher stands near a small table. Water lets out a gentle burble as the butler carefully pours it from a glass pitcher into a cup. Christheart smiles softly as the butler hands the drink directly over to him. The guy takes a steady gulp from the glass while looking out into the night. Watching him closely from behind, the butler speaks up, wondering aloud if the noisy stranger outside could perhaps be the formidable lord they call the Sacred Lion Sword. Christheart lets out a sly laugh, stating clearly that he already knows the true identity of the intruder. He looks down at his glass with a small sigh, honestly wondering to himself what the head knight thinks he is doing out there. In the forest, Leonid stands far out in the dark woods next to his massive weapon, huffing and puffing heavily as he tries to catch his breath after his intense outburst. Leonid continues to pant and sweat heavily, his face flushed red as he rests a gloved hand near his chest. He stares off intently into the darkness, completely exhausted as his dramatic evening finally draws to a close. A thick thicket of blooming roses grows densely alongside a tall metal fence with pointed spikes. A large, grand estate stands beautifully behind an iron gate, featuring neat garden hedges and a multi-tiered fountain that sprays water high. Inside a spacious and elegantly decorated office, Christhart sits quietly at a large wooden desk, focusing intently on the paperwork before him. He introduces himself directly, offering a knowing smile. Christhart continues to write on the documents, reflecting that he inherited the title of Count from his father 5 years ago and feels he is doing quite well for himself at 26 years old. He notes that his domain has recently gained 2 new inhabitants, one of them being the former daughter of a duke who was banished from the neighboring kingdom. He recalls that when Elizabeth first arrived to introduce herself in her simple church veil, she did not seem nearly as villainous as the common rumors made her out to be. As Christhart thinks about the other new inhabitant, a series of loud thumps suddenly rattles his office door. He pauses his writing with a knowing grin and mutters to himself that he should speak of the devil. The double doors burst open with a loud slam as Leonid aggressively steps into the office. He loudly announces his arrival to Christhart, clutching his fist tight. Christhart smiles and dryly observes that Leonid is already inside, but Leonid abruptly turns on his heel and casually bids him farewell. Stunned by the sudden exit, a sweating Christhart chases after his friend while frantically yelling at him to wait up. Standing by the large wooden doors, Leonid bluntly asks why he should stay, leaving Christhart completely bewildered as he questions why Leonid is leaving so suddenly. He gestures with an open hand, reminding Leonid that as the head knight, his status is equal to a count and he needs to learn to mind his manners. He adds that since Leonid bothered to stop by, he should at least make a report and ask how the barn is doing. Leonid turns around with a serious expression, explaining that Christhart told him to poke his head in when picking up his horse, so he did. He notes that he also visited the day he arrived in the village, confirms he fixed the barn next to the pen, and finishes by offering his thanks for the horse. Christhart lets out a small sigh with a strained smile, thinking to himself that Leonid really still sucks at conversations. He walks over and gently pats Leonid on the shoulder. He expresses his sheer disbelief that Leonid actually up and moved to the region and even brought his beloved horse along. Looking off to the side, Leonid states firmly that he plans to stay in the area for at least a year. Christhart smiles broadly behind Leonid, praising the King of Moors for being very generous to give him an entire year off. He supposes that is the clear benefit of having a superior record and no sick days. Leonid turns his stern gaze slightly, grumbling that his subordinates apparently cannot get any rest whenever he is around. Hearing this, Christhart breaks into a nervous sweat and realizes exactly why Leonid was granted a leave of absence. The visual shifts as Christhart watches Leonid sit down, noticing the distinct, pale scar marking the back of Leonid's neck. He reflects that they used to see each other almost every day when they were younger, but notes that they have both become incredibly busy now that they are grown up. He adds that it has been 5 years since they were last able to sit down and have a chat like this, causing a completely blank Leonid to repeat the mention of 5 years in confusion. Christhart gestures dramatically while standing in the middle of the room, explaining that it happened 5 years ago right after he became count. He vividly describes how the famous sacred lion's sword gallantly came to protect him from bandits, asking if Leonid seriously does not remember the event. Leonid stares blankly ahead in complete silence, struggling to recall exactly when that could have been. Christhart smiles subtly, noting to himself that Leonid clearly forgot the event. He recalls that 5 years ago, he was on a dangerous mission to eliminate some bandits when Leonid saved him from near certain death. A vivid memory reveals a younger Leonid fiercely fighting off attackers to protect a fallen Christhart. The scar on Leonid's neck is a lasting wound from that very incident, serving as a constant reminder of the debt Christhart owes to him. He looks off to the side with a slightly strained expression, reflecting on how he genuinely wants to repay his friend in any way he can, even though he is currently struggling to give him a hand. Christhart raises a finger thoughtfully, changing the subject by mentioning that speaking of bandits, there has recently been a string of small burglaries in the village. This news catches Leonid completely off guard, causing him to react with sudden alertness. Leonid instantly responds with intense energy, demanding to know how many people are involved and where their base is located. He raises his hand to soothe his eager friend, telling Leonid to calm down because there are only about 5 people and they do not even have a hideout. He explains that while Leonid is here on vacation, he just thought Leonid could help out by patrolling a little. Leonid immediately answers, declaring that to ensure the citizens' safety, he will gladly assist in the maintenance of public order. Christheart looks back at him with a flat, completely speechless expression. Christheart steps closer, clarifying that he actually meant for Leonid to take that suggestion merely as advice. Leonid looks up from his seat with a confused expression. He winks and raises a finger, pointing out that patrolling would give Leonid a perfect excuse to run into her naturally. Leonid simply stares back blankly, completely lost as he silently questions who he is supposed to run into. As a long, silent pause stretches between the two men, Christheart breaks into a nervous sweat and smiles knowingly to himself. He wonders if Leonid honestly thinks that nobody has figured out his little secret, even though it is completely plain as day. He firmly grabs Leonid by the shoulders, silently cheering for Leo to hang in there and noting that he is rooting for him. Leonid responds with complete focus on his duty, stating that this time he will not let the bandits do him in, which only causes Christheart to sigh that the bandits are not what he is worried about. Leonid abruptly evades Christheart's grasp and turns to leave, offering a brief thanks for taking care of his horse before announcing that he will be on his way. He calls out behind him to stop him, casually mentioning that the comment just reminded him of something. He adds that he heard the nun who recently arrived in the village happens to like horses. Leonid pauses, sharply demanding to know what that piece of information could possibly have to do with anything. A sudden, heavy slam echoes through the space as Leonid exits, followed by the frantic sound of running fading down the hall. Christheart is left standing completely alone. He walks over to the window and sighs, noting to himself that Leonid has got it much worse than he initially thought. Outside, Leonid aggressively gallops away on his dark horse with a loud neigh, prompting Christheart to reflect that he will have to put more effort into helping his friend out. A neat chessboard sits quietly on a white table in the room. Christheart continues his inner thoughts, pondering what will happen next between the eccentric nun, who is the former daughter of a duke, and the blunt, strong head knight. Standing outside, Elizabeth suddenly feels a sharp tickle in her nose, prompting a quick gasp right before she lets out a loud sneeze while covering her mouth with her hand. A nearby villager looks at her with concern, asking if she caught a cold. She calmly assures the villager that she is completely fine. Our girl offers a bright smile, kindly telling the old lady not to strain themselves and to let her know if they need any help with manual labor. She also cheerfully reminds them to please eat today's bread within 2 days. The old villager nods, noting that the bread is soft and delicious but unfortunately does not last very long and it is too bad that it does not keep well. Elizabeth thanks the woman warmly and smiles, promising that she will bring some more soon so there is no need to worry. She waves a cheerful goodbye as she walks down the path, calling out to the villager to take care until next time. The older woman raises a hand to wave back. Walking down the road with her basket, Elizabeth taps her feet happily, thrilled that the villager called her bread delicious. She then considers the woman's words, reflecting that it really is hard to keep the bread fresh and noting that her own baked goods cannot stay good for very long. She walks past a wooden signpost at a crossroads, telling herself that it is time to move on to the next house. Suddenly, the loud sound of heavy thuds echoes right behind her, causing her to freeze in mild surprise as the heavy footsteps quickly close in. A dark horse violently rears its front legs high into the air directly behind Elizabeth. Leonid sits firmly in the saddle, pulling hard on the reins to halt the beast, while a startled Elizabeth tightly clutches her dress in shock. Leonid scowls downward, warning Elizabeth that she will get kicked by the horse if she does not watch where she is going. Elizabeth looks back at him with wide eyes. As Leonid sits firmly on his mount, Elizabeth stands a short distance away, trembling in fear. She grows completely confused, questioning what he is doing here and frantically wondering to herself if the man is actually a stalker. Leonid smoothly dismounts from his horse and tilts his head toward Elizabeth, bluntly telling her to get on the animal. A wave of dread washes over Elizabeth's face as she quickly declines, firmly stating that she will not join him. Undeterred by her refusal, Leonid calmly tells her to walk instead, announcing that he is currently out on patrol. Our girl stands under a dark cloud of gloom, realizing with frustration that he really is tailing her. Elizabeth walks quietly down the village path with her basket, while Leonid steadily guides his large horse right alongside her. She glances over at Leonid as they stand side by side, completely taken aback by his intense glare. Sweat drops from her face as she wallows in despair, bitterly wondering what happened to her carefree life and questioning why this is happening to her. Trying to break the awkward silence, Elizabeth compliments Leonid's horse, noting that it looks very wise, strong, and exceptionally muscular. In response, Leonid stands in silence, suddenly flexing his own arm muscles with a firm squeeze. She turns back to address him as Sir Leonid, asking what the horse's name is. Startled by the sudden question, Leonid breaks into a nervous sweat while rapidly stretching his fingers, bluntly answering that the animal's name is Florestano. Our girl smiles gently and pets the horse's face, warmly calling it Good Florestano. She considers a nickname for the beast, softly musing whether she should call it Floris or perhaps Flor. Leonid looks away with a slightly annoyed expression, but he suddenly breaks the silence by telling Elizabeth that she can just call him Leo. Elizabeth pauses and looks back in utter confusion, completely bewildered by his sudden request. Our girl questions him, asking if she should not refer to him as Sir Leonid instead. Leonid walks steadily forward beside his horse, explaining that he is officially on vacation now. Elizabeth sighs quietly to herself, internally muttering what a pain the situation is before aloud deciding that Leonid it is. Hearing this, Leonid closes his eyes and breaks into a mild blush, softly admitting that it is perfectly fine. The heavy iron gates let out a loud creak as the group arrives at a large stone mansion. Elizabeth stands before the entrance with a nervous expression, determinedly telling herself that today is the day she will finally accomplish her goal, while Leonid holds the reins of his horse and glances over in mild curiosity. A young maid stands at the top of the mansion steps, staring down with a completely cold and serious expression as Elizabeth and Leonid approach the grand entryway. The maid crossly addresses Sister Elizabeth, demanding to know if she has returned once again. She firmly folds her hands, stating that her lady explicitly declared she would not accept any visitors. Our girl desperately pleads with the maid, asking her not to turn her away. The maid remains entirely unmoved, repeating her request for Elizabeth to leave immediately. The heavy wooden front door lets out a loud creak as another maid peeks out from the small opening, nervously explaining that the young lady is currently not feeling well. Elizabeth quickly lunges forward and grabs the inner maid's hand, begging to be let inside for just a single day. The sudden movement terrifies the household staff, causing the inner maid to shriek in fear while the first maid frantically yells at Elizabeth to step away. Seeing the household staff struggle to keep the door shut, Elizabeth turns back and frantically shouts for Leonid to help her out. Leonid stands a short distance away, reacting with sudden surprise to the urgent request. Leonid steps in and asks if she simply wants him to open the door, which Elizabeth confirms while explaining she only needs enough room to slip inside. With powerful movements, Leonid shoves the massive double doors wide open, sending the maids flying back into the entryway with startled groans. Leonid calmly announces that he successfully opened the door. Elizabeth breaks out into a nervous sweat, as she awkwardly thanks him for the forceful assistance. Elizabeth quickly slips past the entryway while the rhythmic sound of her footsteps echoes forward. Behind her, Leonid stands by the wide-open door and looks down at the retching, fallen maid, calmly asking if she is okay after flying straight out the doorway. Our girl lightly lifts her long skirts as she walks steadily up the grand stone staircase. She reflects on the knight's terrifying strength, recalling how incredibly scary it felt when he chased her through the palace, but she secretly notes to herself that when he is actually on her side, he is rather reliable. She continues through the mansion corridors, thinking to herself how incredibly convenient it is to have the fierce commander serve as a literal lion doorstopper to hold back the household staff. Elizabeth approaches a set of grand double doors deep within the hall. She knocks softly on the wood, calling out to check if Charlotte is there and gently asking if they can talk for just a brief minute. The heavy handle suddenly unlatches. Surprised by the lack of resistance, Elizabeth swallows hard, realizing the entry is completely unlocked. Our girl smoothly swings the door open and steps into the room. She softly speaks up to reassure the resident, stating that she is coming inside and there is no need to be scared since she is completely on her side. Suddenly, Charlotte aims a loaded crossbow directly forward, aggressively shouting for the intruder to stop right there. Elizabeth gasps in sheer terror upon spotting the weapon, frantically realizing that Charlotte is aiming a literal crossbow directly at her face. Suddenly, a sharp bolt fires through the air. Our girl widens her eyes in panic, realizing the incoming attack looks very bad as the bolt flies straight toward her. Before the arrow can strike, Leonid lunges forward with incredible speed and catches the flying bolt mid-air with his bare hand. Elizabeth stands safely behind him, tightly covering her face in fear. The room falls into a tense silence as both Leonid and Elizabeth stand perfectly still. Leonid turns his head, calmly asking Elizabeth if she is all right. Breaking into a mild blush, a sweating Elizabeth looks up, softly stuttering out that she is indeed okay. Witnessing this, Elizabeth lets out a quiet sigh of relief, realizing the weapon was merely a harmless toy. However, Leonid turns away with a cold sweat dropping from his neck, sternly asking if she truly thought he would forgive such an action just because the weapon happens to be a toy. He grips the projectile tightly in his fist, stating that it could still cause serious harm if it hit him in the wrong place and declaring that the very minute someone draws a weapon on the battlefield, they instantly become his enemy. Elizabeth and Charlotte shiver violently with sweat dropping from their faces, internally screaming in complete unison about how incredibly scary the head knight is. Charlotte trembles upon the bed and mutters that she only intended to frighten the visitors a little. Standing nearby, Elizabeth's sweat drops as she thinks to herself that Leonid showed absolutely no mercy to a child, even though this place is clearly not a battlefield. Our girl stares ahead, deeply reflecting on the situation. She realizes that the man guarding her possesses incredible physical abilities, especially when considering how he caught a flying arrow barehanded and easily broke it. Charlotte points an accusing finger upward and loudly declares that it was entirely their fault for entering her room uninvited. Clutching her blanket close, she frantically begs Elizabeth and her companion to please leave immediately. Elizabeth offers a gentle smile, stating that they are finally able to talk face to face. Looking back with wide eyes, Charlotte identifies her as Sister Elizabeth, the famous daughter of the former Duke, and firmly tells her to just go home if she has already accomplished her goal of meeting her. She leans in closely to explain that she has not even invited her to Sunday Mass yet. Hearing this, Charlotte huffs and crosses her arms, loudly declaring that she is definitely not going. Charlotte reacts with sudden frustration, as she loudly states that she is the laughingstock of the entire village. Our girl looks firmly, explaining that such a thing is not possible because everyone in the village is actually waiting for her. Charlotte completely turns away, pouting and wrapping her arms around herself in absolute denial. 14-year-old Charlotte is the daughter of a successful businessman who eventually became a baron and joined the ranks of the nobility. Because her naive personality was deemed completely unbecoming of a noble household, she was shunned by her family and sent away to the countryside under the official excuse that she needed to rest and recover from an illness. This banishment reflects the classic noble custom of quietly getting rid of a nuisance. Charlotte keeps her back completely turned, as she stubbornly insists that she is sick and absolutely needs to recover. She convinces herself that she cannot possibly go home until she gets better, firmly believing that if she goes outside, she will not be able to get any rest. Our girl presses the issue, mentioning that Charlotte has been staying inside for more than a year and reminding her that the village doctor already declared she was fully recovered. Charlotte continues to hide her face, aggressively retorting that she cannot possibly trust a common village doctor. Elizabeth asks Charlotte if the rank of a noble is truly not as important to her as it is to her own parents. Looking downward, Charlotte softly admits that it is not, but adds that everyone around her suddenly changed so completely. Elizabeth stands silently for a moment before stepping over to the side of the room. As she walks, she gently reassures Charlotte, telling the young girl that she is absolutely right and that the situation is not her fault at all. Charlotte watches in surprise as a sudden movement catches her attention. Our girl throws her arms open, pulling open the large window curtains to let the brilliant sunlight flood deep into the dim room. She happily suggests that they should try to have some genuine fun while they are both staying out in the village, adding enthusiastically that there are so many unique things the two of them can talk about together. The sudden burst of bright light completely blinds Charlotte, causing her to quickly block her eyes with her. Looking completely startled, Charlotte desperately yells out for Elizabeth to stop what she is doing and to immediately close the curtains. She firmly refuses to close the curtains, explaining that the sunlight is good for Charlotte. She points out that staying inside will make the young girl's legs weak and notes that there is far too much dust in the room. Elizabeth pushes the window wide open and calls out loudly to Leonid. A surprised Leonid turns his head slightly and grunts in response. She smiles brightly, asking Leonid if it is okay for Charlotte to ride on his horse. The sudden request catches Leonid completely off guard, causing him to touch his neck as he awkwardly agrees. Leonid stands quietly near the iron fence with his arms crossed, waiting beside his dark horse Florestano. He looks forward as Elizabeth calls out to thank him for waiting. Charlotte walks down the stone steps outside while wearing a long, elaborate dress, looking thoroughly annoyed. She grips the fabric of her skirt and mutters in frustration about why she has to wear this outfit, while Elizabeth follows closely behind her. Watching from the mansion window, the maids let out emotional sobs as they joyfully celebrate that their young lady is finally going outside. Meanwhile, Elizabeth approaches the dark horse and gently pets its face, affectionately asking to borrow him. Leonid stops Elizabeth, explicitly asking if she is seriously planning to ride the horse while wearing those long clothes. Elizabeth pauses and looks up thoughtfully, suddenly realizing that he is right and that her flowing fabric would easily get caught on something. She gathers the long fabric of her dress together and begins tying a tight knot to bundle up her skirt. Witnessing this sudden action, Leonid breaks out into a heavy, panicked sweat. With her dress safely tied up to expose her legs, Elizabeth easily mounts the horse and sits firmly in the saddle. She looks down at Leonid, happily announcing that everything is perfectly fine now. Leonid's face turns completely red. He stares blankly, completely stunned after Elizabeth asks if he will help put Charlotte on the horse right in front of her. Charlotte gasps out in pure terror as she is placed onto the large animal. She clings tightly to the horse's neck while Elizabeth sits calmly behind her, holding the reins. Blushing intensely, Charlotte frantically shouts that the entire situation is incredibly improper. Elizabeth remains perfectly relaxed behind her, casually pointing out that they are out in the countryside and absolutely no one will care. She confidently guides the reins and announces that they are officially ready to set off. In response, a terrified Charlotte breaks into a frantic panic. The horse walks smoothly down the road. Charlotte continues to panic, screaming that the ride is way too shaky and that she feels like she is going to fall off, while Elizabeth calmly reassures her that she is completely fine since the horse is walking very slowly. Elizabeth looks forward with a smile, eagerly telling Charlotte to open her eyes because the view outside is absolutely amazing. Charlotte keeps her face buried. She slowly opens her eyes and catches her breath in sudden wonder. From atop the horse, she gazes out at the sweeping green hills, a small cottage nestled in the distance, and the vast, wide-open sky stretching across the peaceful countryside. Stunned by the beautiful view, Charlotte quietly murmurs in amazement. Elizabeth smiles warmly, teasingly asking if she did not already say that Charlotte would enjoy it. Charlotte turns back, demanding to know why Elizabeth is even here. Looking suspicious, she loudly asks if Elizabeth is trying to butter her up for some hidden reason. Elizabeth responds with a bright smile, completely denying the accusation. She explains that she simply wants to have a genuinely good time, which leaves a completely bewildered Charlotte uttering in confusion. Elizabeth points out that both of them were successfully freed from the heavy obligations of nobility, meaning they can now do whatever they want away from everyone's watchful eyes. Charlotte listens quietly, reflecting that they might as well make the absolute best of their situation by doing exactly what they want. Our girl points out that despite their freedom, she still has a terrifyingly intense set of eyes glaring down right at her. Standing down on the ground, Leonid channels a massive, angry glow from his eyes while Charlotte listens. Charlotte gently reminds Elizabeth that the family of a duke is entirely different from a newly recognized baron's household. Our girl says that the two of them are still very much the same. She offers a smile, stating that no matter what, she simply could not leave Charlotte all alone, which leaves the young girl staring back in quiet reflection. The group continues their journey through the quiet forest trail. Walking steadily alongside them while carrying a light basket, they paused near a large, ancient tree as Elizabeth decides that this looks like the perfect spot to stop. Our girl lays out a large blanket, presenting a wonderful spread of various fresh baked goods and a full bread basket. She cheerfully announces that it is officially time to eat and invites them to have a taste of her newly invented, energizing two birds with one stone bread, causing both Charlotte and a stoic Leonid to look down at the meal in mild surprise. The girl stares directly down at the plates of food, stubbornly declaring that the bread looks incredibly weird and firmly stating that she absolutely cannot eat this. Elizabeth smiles brightly while holding a bottle and a cup, cheerfully urging Charlotte to just try a single bite. She mentions that she also brought plenty of water and tea for everyone to drink during their picnic. Our girl internally reflects on her baking creations, noting that the people in this fantasy world are still completely unaccustomed to the unique sweet buns and side dish breads that were so widely popular back in Japan. 2 neatly prepared long rolls rest silently on a wooden plate. Developing these recipes was a long process filled with trial and error. Elizabeth remembers working in a stone oven where her first attempts ended up completely burnt, leaving her feeling utterly discouraged as the internal fillings continually fell out of the dough. She successfully created 3 distinct varieties, including peanut bread, croquette bread, and kinpira bread. While nuts were highly expensive, she minimized costs by growing her own inside the church's empty land garden. Potatoes were universally cheap and plentiful, allowing her to easily develop the fried food filling, while burdock roots and carrots provided a healthy, distinct option. Out of all the components she gathered, the peanuts proved to be the absolute hardest ingredient to come by in the region. Elizabeth reflects on her past life, remembering that peanuts were originally a product of South America. She notes that they did not seem to exist on the continent of Dacreston, which features an environment very similar to Europe. She recalls the unique biology of the crop, noting that after the peanut flower has successfully bloomed, the plant sends vine-like tendrils straight down into the earth, which eventually grow to become seeds wrapped inside hard shells. Elizabeth sweats slightly as she considers the strange plant, thinking to herself that it is slightly horrific to imagine tendrils reaching out directly from the wilting flowers. She concludes that the plants simply have to spread their seeds somehow. She smiles to herself in the kitchen, reasoning that since true peanuts might not even exist in this world, she can simply find and use something similar instead. A loud crack echoes as hands firmly peel open a tough outer shell to reveal a smooth nut inside. Our girl reflects that the actual process of making nut butter itself is not difficult at all, noting that a person just needs to have some steady perseverance. Elizabeth explains that the trick to roasting the nuts is to catch them right before they burn over the open flame. An arrow diagram illustrates how they are poured into a container to cool down, after which the skins must be completely removed so the nuts can be collected in a mortar bowl. Our girl stands happily inside the church kitchen while holding a mortar bowl and a wooden pestle. She notes that the first active step is to gently sauté the nuts while their thick skins are still left on. Working steadily, Elizabeth puts her physical effort into the preparation, continuously mashing the ingredients. She works to reduce the solid nuts into a completely fine texture. Once a thick, smooth paste has successfully formed inside the container, Elizabeth explains that the final step is to simply mix in the sugar. A row of filled ceramic jars stands ready on the table, marking the completion of her homemade nut butter. Back at the picnic, our girl looks over toward Leonid as she finishes explaining her recipe. Leonid sits firmly on the grass nearby with an intensely focused glare, causing a sweating Elizabeth to internally realize that his expression of anticipation is probably his version of asking if he can eat some of the food too. She extends her hand to offer him some of the food, asking if he would like to try a piece. Leonid immediately shifts his body forward, leaning in as his long arm reaches down toward the spread of food. He holds up the selected piece of food directly in front of his face. Charlotte watches in absolute disbelief, internally reflecting on his choice, thinking that out of all the options laid out before them, he went for the absolute weirdest one. Leonid takes a massive bite out of the bread, aggressively munching and crunching on the food. Charlotte addresses him as Sir Leonid and asks him if the food is actually good. He remains completely silent, pointing thoughtfully at his chin as he eats. Charlotte observes him closely, realizing that he is not listening at all because he has become totally absorbed in the meal. She turns her gaze downward toward the plate of long rolls in quiet contemplation. She picks up one of the plain long rolls, holding the smooth bread out to inspect it. She considers the option, wondering if this specific one might look better to eat. Watching her selection from the side, Elizabeth notes her choice. Our girl silently observes the scene, noting that Charlotte chose the most harmless-looking option out of the entire spread. Holding the roll close to her face, Charlotte begins a very hesitant visual evaluation of the baked goods. Elizabeth secretly smiles to herself, reflecting that the chosen food is actually the peanut-like sweet bread, which carries a truly devilish flavor. Charlotte opens her mouth wide and takes a bite out of the end of the roll. The sudden rush of flavor completely catches Charlotte off guard, causing her cheeks to instantly flush red with deep blush. Charlotte gazes at the roll, softly noting how incredibly soft the bread is and expressing amazement that there is such delicious sweet stuff hidden inside. Our girl smiles broadly, happily confirming her reaction. She breaks into a warm, joyful grin, thinking to herself that it is exactly because of these deeply appreciative faces that she can never bring herself to give up cooking. The picnic continues quietly as both guests steadily eat their selected rolls. Elizabeth turns her head to look back, silently observing that Leonid is really going to town on the food. While she assumes the meal does not taste bad to him, she cannot help but notice his tense demeanor. Leonid continues to chew steadily. Even though he is thoroughly enjoying the food, Elizabeth reflects that his face remains just as scary as ever. She sweat drops as she curiously wonders what Leonid would actually look like if he ever decided to smile. Instantly, a terrifying mental image of a shady, grinning face flashes through her mind. Our girl sits quietly on the blanket, watching Leonid eat his food from across the picnic area. She internally reflects that she sometimes genuinely wants to try and put a happy expression on his face. Elizabeth rapidly shakes her head, quickly reassuring herself that she does not mean it in any weird way. She reflects that it is simply her natural urge as a former professional event planner, though she notes that she does not actually need to make any excuses to anyone. Our girl smiles subtly, thinking to herself that first, she really has to smooth out that persistent wrinkle carved right between Leonid's eyebrows. Leonid lowers his head, quietly offering his standard phrase of thanks for the food. Charlotte holds her cloth to her face, as she quietly echoes the same phrase to give thanks for the food. Our girl turns directly to Charlotte, gently asking how the meal was and wondering if the unique roll suited her tastes. Charlotte turns her gaze, stubbornly muttering that it wasn't bad. She looks up at Elizabeth. With a slightly hesitant tone, she asks if it would be okay for her to attend Mass on Sunday. Elizabeth's face lights up with absolute joy. She eagerly confirms that it is perfectly fine, happily adding that absolutely everyone in the area has been wanting to meet her. She raises her finger, announcing that after Mass concludes, the two of them will meet directly inside the kitchen. Charlotte reacts with sudden shock, demanding to know if Elizabeth simply means to make her participate in those strange cooking creations. Meanwhile, Leonid sits silently on the grass, observing the lively exchange in complete silence. Our girl turns back to explain her plan, stating that she wants them to work together. She explains that her goal is to prepare delicious food items for the upcoming church bazaar, which is scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. She firmly declares that since she is officially living here in the village, she absolutely cannot let the citizens say that the sisters' treats are always the exact same. Charlotte softly giggles, smiling warmly as she addresses Elizabeth directly, observing that she is a very worldly nun. Elizabeth reacts with a bright smile, as she wonders out loud if it is true, playfully asking Charlotte if the role suits her. Charlotte quickly turns her back to hide her expression, stubbornly insisting that she never said such a thing and firmly stating that it was absolutely not a compliment. Elizabeth stands a short distance away, sweat dropping comically as she lets out an awkward sigh. Charlotte crossly warns Elizabeth not to get cocky just because she knows how to make some weird bread. Elizabeth objects, reminding the young girl that she just admitted it was delicious. Standing nearby, Leonid grunts and listens silently to their playful bickering as light laughter fills the air. As the sun begins to set over the rolling landscape, the wide evening sky fills with dark, shifting clouds. Elizabeth internally reflects that in any world, a person's absolute greatest pleasure is always food. She notes that thanks to the plentiful ingredients and the excess of church funds, she will continue working steadily to create even more delicious recipes. Under a darkening evening sky, the bell tower of Nortia Church stands quietly. Elizabeth raises her arms high to stretch, thinking to herself that the second greatest pleasure in any world must be amusement. Armed with her past event planning knowledge, she sets a strong resolve to think up unique things that the local children and villagers can genuinely enjoy. She breaks out into a happy smile under the clear light, throwing her arms up to stretch her body. She calls out enthusiastically that she is definitely going to make the upcoming church bazaar a massive, roaring success. The visual shifts to the dark woods outside the church building as night completely settles over the land. Hidden within the shadows of the trees, a group of figures makes a quiet step forward. One of the men whispers maliciously that the church seems to have a lot of money recently, to which another chuckles slyly, adding that anything connected near a noble usually fetches a massive lot of coins. Deep inside the dark brush, a group of 3 suspicious men plots their next move in the shadows. The lead bandit features a prominent scar on his cheek as he lets out a malicious grin, whispering that they will take full advantage of the whole festival. The other men smile knowingly behind him as he declares their final plan to take absolutely everything from those complacent idiots. Metal rhythmic sounds echo inside a busy workshop full of tools like buckets, shovels, and rakes. Elizabeth internally reflects that even things that do not exist in this fantasy world can be made with a little bit of imagination. She finds that it deeply touches her heart when she successfully finishes her preparations under these circumstances. She feels a lot of pressure to make the day of the event absolutely perfect. However, since she can use her valuable past experience as a professional event planner from her previous life, she resolves to pour her entire heart as Sister Elizabeth into preparing for the upcoming church bazaar. A large, custom-made metal cooking tray sits surrounded by a bright, sparkling aura. Looking down at the completed item, Elizabeth happily reflects in amazement that it looks absolutely great. A bearded blacksmith named Hobart stands in his workshop while wearing protective gloves and tool pouches, wiping sweat from his neck. He mentions that he worked very hard to fulfill the specific request. He remains deeply puzzled by the creation, noting that it has such a strange shape and is made entirely out of copper instead of traditional iron. Our girl giggles happily with a warm heart floating in the air, as she touches the metal tray. She offers a cheerful apology to the blacksmith, explaining that she wanted to be completely sure it had those exact rounded, circular areas. A small handheld pick and a brush are neatly placed on top of a cut wooden log. The blacksmith presents the custom items that were specifically requested, prompting a cheerful voice to instantly shout out a warm message of thanks. The blacksmith stands holding a large, heavy blade, announcing that the final item left in the back is ready. Elizabeth looks back in mild surprise, but a sudden shadow creeps up directly behind her. Turning her head, Elizabeth lets out a terrified shriek as Leonid stands tall. Our girl jumps back in pure shock, frantically demanding to know when Leonid arrived and why he would possibly be at a blacksmith's shop. She covers her mouth in agitation, grumbling that he always seems to appear completely out of thin air. She asks why he is here. Leonid calmly questions why his presence is such a surprise, explaining that he simply came to the shop to retrieve his weapon. He asks why she is currently at the workshop. Elizabeth cheerfully explains that she is actually here for the exact same reason. Elizabeth proudly announces that she came to the shop to collect her weapons. Our girl happily sways with a deeply satisfied look. Suddenly, she acts out a dynamic mock combat scene, punching forward while holding the large metal tray as a shield. The sudden, strange display leaves a completely baffled Leonid staring with massive question marks floating around his head. The blacksmith notes that Leonid's visit was not for a new order, laughingly asking the knight how many times he has already had to fix that same item and warning him to be more careful. Elizabeth happily cheers that thanks to the blacksmith, she bets the results will be delicious. The blacksmith chuckles that he makes a fine profit anyway, so it is no big deal. The blacksmith admits that he has absolutely no idea how Elizabeth plans to use the giant tray, but offers to send it directly to the church later that evening once his delivery cart returns. Our girl firmly grabs the heavy handles, brightly declining the offer while explaining that she wants to try it out right away and will gladly haul it back all by herself. Elizabeth bends down as she prepares to lift the heavy metal object, reasoning that if she holds it a certain way, she should be able to manage. However, the sheer weight of the large tray instantly takes a toll on her, causing her entire body to shake violently as she strains under the heavy load while slowly trying to move forward. Leonid leans down and calmly offers to take the load himself. Elizabeth looks up at him with wide, completely startled eyes. He effortlessly hoists the massive tray over his shoulder and walks away with steady footsteps, confirming that he is heading straight to Nortia Church. He casually calls back to the blacksmith that he will return to pick up his sword later. Elizabeth reaches her hand out in a panic, desperately telling Leonid to stop and wait for the delivery cart. Hobart laughs heartily at the display, praising the man's incredible power and noting that he could barely lift that heavy item with both of his hands. He tells the nun that she has a truly reliable guard by her side. Elizabeth flatly corrects the blacksmith by explaining that Leonid is not her bodyguard and that he actually has the whole dynamic completely backwards. She nervously thinks to herself that there is definitely no escaping her shadow now. Elizabeth reflects to herself that he truly is the super-strong head knight. She follows a short distance behind as Leonid marches along the dirt path carrying the large metal object. Elizabeth internally reflects that she has absolutely no idea what Leonid is thinking as usual. However, she notes that as long as she does not act weirdly, it does not seem like her presence in this village is causing any real problem. She reflects internally that if he truly comes in handy, then maybe it is actually a good thing that he decided to stick around after all. Farther down the path, Leonid halts his steps and turns his head while carrying the large copper tray over his shoulder. Spotting him stop, Elizabeth jumps forward excitedly with a basket in her hand, loudly calling out that she will be right there. She notices the distance between them, internally grumbling that she is already off to a slow start. Elizabeth walks beside Leonid and thanks him warmly for carrying the heavy item. Leonid offers a brief, quiet grunt of acknowledgement, prompting Elizabeth to happily declare that she is now completely sure the upcoming bazaar will be a massive success. Leonid turns his gaze toward her, calmly asking if that tray was the absolute last thing she needed to gather. She raises her hands, as she explains her remaining plans. She points out that there are still several items she needs that are incredibly hard to obtain within the village itself. To solve this, she announces that tomorrow she will run directly over to the nearby port to finish up some quick shopping. Startled by the unexpected news, he questions the mention of the port, demanding to know if she seriously plans on traveling out there entirely by herself. Elizabeth quickly assures Leonid that she is absolutely not trying to run away and clarifies that the journey is merely a simple day trip. Leonid's brow furrows deeply with an intense, protective glare as he breaks into a nervous sweat. Remembering the warning about the recent string of burglaries, he firmly declares that he will be coming along too. Our girl reacts with sudden shock, desperately trying to decline by explaining that there is absolutely no need because she wants to catch the morning market, meaning the departure will be incredibly early. Undeterred, Leonid states that he is completely used to early hours. This prompts a panicked Elizabeth to stutter out that she intends to leave at 5 in the morning, to which Leonid instantly notes that 5 in the morning is perfectly fine. He casually adjusts his collar, finalizing the plan by announcing that he will meet her right here tomorrow at 5 in the morning. She reaches out past the wooden double doors of the courtyard, desperately calling out after him to stop. She holds up a single hand to try and stop the head knight, hopelessly muttering for him to wait as she processes the sudden turn of events. Later at night, Elizabeth happily figures out a brand new plan as she walks down the path under the starry night sky. She cheerfully hums to herself, reasoning that if Leonid can carry all of her shopping purchases, then having him tag along might actually come in handy after all. The scene transitions to Leonid's small wooden house on the outskirts of the region. Inside his simple brick room, Leonid stands silently beside his bed and uses a small towel to dry his face after washing up for the evening. He takes a steady gulp of water from a glass, resolving internally to head straight to bed early tonight. He focuses intently, determined to get enough rest so he can successfully protect Elizabeth tomorrow no matter what happens. Leonid snuggles under his blanket, sleepily reflecting on the upcoming trip to the port that will be just him and Elizabeth together. As time passes in a series of 3 panels, he lies perfectly awake as the rhythmic ticking of the clock echoes continuously through the dark bedroom. Completely restless, he realizes with growing frustration that he simply cannot sleep at all. Leonid grips his blanket tight as his eyes refuse to shut. He thinks to himself that the harder he tries to sleep, the more awake he becomes. In his mind, a visualization appears of his dark horse, Florestano, leaping repeatedly over a small fence as he tries counting the animal to drift off. The mental tally continues climbing past 2,797, but our guy remains completely wide awake. Defeated by his restlessness, he finally sits up on the edge of the wooden bed frame. Leonid gives up on trying to rest entirely. He nods his head sleepily, deciding that he will simply spend the remaining hours training until it is officially time to depart. The scene transitions outside into the dark night as our guy prepares his gear. He puts on his traveling cloak before stepping out onto the wooden balcony of his cabin. Walking out to the nearby clearing, our boy looks toward his massive weapon thrust firmly into the ground, reflecting that up until now, no matter how important a military mission was, he never experienced this kind of restlessness. Leonid looks down at his gloved hand. He reflects deeply on his past, noting to himself that there was absolutely never a time in his life when he was unable to sleep before a big event. Standing near the dark tree line, Leonid places his hand firmly on the hilt of his heavy sword. Sudden movements out in the woods catch him by surprise, causing his eyes to instantly narrow as he stays completely alert to his surroundings. Our guy listens intently in absolute silence as a distinct rustling sound echoes deep inside the dark brush. Tracking the subtle noises through the dense trees, he realizes that there are initially 2 people sneaking through the forest, before quickly correcting his count to 3. Leonid silently observes the intruders' movements, noting that they are purposely trying to disguise their presence by softening their footsteps. He realizes that they are traveling without a light source even in the middle of the night, directly concluding that the shadowy figures are actually bandits. Deep within the clearing under the large trees, the 3 bandits gather in a small circle to discuss their findings. One of the men steps forward to ask about their target, prompting a companion to report back that there was absolutely nothing inside that house. Hearing the disappointing news, the lead bandit smiles maliciously as he makes their next move choice. He announces that it is officially decided then and declares that they will go for the church instead, which his partner quickly confirms with a nod. The bandit clenches his fist tightly. He plots out their sinister strategy, explaining that they can easily hold the church sisters hostage. While they are at it, they can use the leverage to thoroughly plunder the count's grand manor as well. Another bandit chuckles softly while resting a hand on his chin, completely amused by their plot. He recalls seeing the group earlier that afternoon, commenting that the church sisters themselves are a rather fine set of jewels. He suggests that when they go after the main supply of money, they could take the sisters for themselves too. Suddenly, a powerful voice breaks out from the darkness, calmly asking the group if they would like to have a go. The 3 intruders freeze in sheer terror as a shadow reveals itself standing right before them in the woods. Stepping directly into the path, Leonid stands tall and imposing under the trees, gripping the hilt of his massive weapon. Panicked by the sudden appearance of the formidable knight, the bandits instantly scatter into the brush while screaming at each other to run. Leonid reacts with blinding speed, firmly declaring that he will absolutely not let them escape. With a powerful whoosh, Leonid swings his heavy blade through the air, narrowly missing one of the intruders who lets out a terrified shriek. Spotting the sheer destructive force behind the attack, the lead bandit clicks his tongue in frustration. He frantically points toward the dense woods, ordering his companions to run between the trees to escape the knight's reach. Fleeing deeper into the dense brush, the lead bandit smirks as he notices Leonid following closely behind. He mocks the knight internally, thinking that the idiot brought such a massive sword into woods like these, reasoning there is absolutely no room to swing it around between all the trees. With a massive boom, Leonid shatters the bandit's expectations by unleashing a devastating strike. The sheer impact leaves a giant column of dust and clean-cut logs crashing down around the startled intruder. Surrounded by a battlefield of freshly chopped wood, the lead bandit sits weakly on the ground next to his unconscious companion, panting heavily as he admits that the knight's power is completely absurd. Noting the massive weapon, the red hair, and the piercing gold eyes, a wave of shocking realization washes over him as he begins to deduce the formidable fighter's true identity. Leonid grips his fist tightly. His voice remains completely cold and steady as he begins to speak, sternly reminding the cornered intruders of the warnings he previously gave. He declares that he previously stated he would not let them escape. The cornered bandit watches him in pure dread, recognizing the formidable warrior as the famous sacred lion sword. While Leonid stands watch over the 2 captured intruders, a 3rd bandit suddenly breaks out from the bushes with a terrified shriek and dashes away into the dense woods. Leonid turns his head, noting the sudden escape while the remaining bandit sits on the ground with squeezed eyes. Running blindly through the dark forest, the escaping bandit pants heavily from pure exhaustion. The fleeing bandit presses forward while gripping a sore shoulder, frantically wondering in sheer panic why a formidable figure like the sacred lion sword is currently living out in this countryside village. Suddenly, the runner skids to a halt at the edge of the brush, panting heavily while staring down toward a hidden opening nestled beneath the thick trees. Dashing inside the mouth of a dark, rocky cavern, the runaway urgently alerts the rest of the hidden crew that someone is hot on their tail. The bandit frantically explains that the pursuer already captured 2 of their guys and suggests that they immediately split up and run. Hearing this sudden warning, the remaining companions look back in shock, anxiously wondering if they are being chased by an entire group of soldiers. The escaping bandit frantically clarifies to the hidden crew that they are not being pursued by an entire group of soldiers, but rather by just one single guy who is absolutely terrifying. The runner adds in a panic that while he somehow managed to split up and get away, he has no idea what to do now. Hearing this, the remaining bandits begin to shake violently in pure, sweating terror. With a sudden crunching sound echoing through the foliage, a tall silhouette firmly steps up to the entrance of the dark cave. Leonid speaks up with a calm, imposing tone, noting to the intruders that this must be the exact place where they have all been hiding. A wave of absolute horror immediately washes over the entire hideout. The scene transitions to the next morning inside a brightly lit bedroom. Elizabeth ties a neat bow behind her hair and announces that she is officially all set for the trip. She looks at her reflection in a large, ornate standing mirror, calmly noting that it has been an exceptionally long time since she last went out in clothes other than her standard church habit. Our girl looks off to the side with a sweating face, thinking to herself that she is not particularly dressed up for the occasion. She gently touches her long hair as she gets ready to leave, internally reflecting that she gets the clear feeling that Leonid is the exceptionally punctual type. Elizabeth breaks out into a nervous sweat as she imagines Leonid waiting aggressively with crossed arms and scolding her for being late. She worries that he might have actually shown up 2 hours early, though she quickly assures herself that such a thought is probably just her imagination. She turns away from the mirror and walks toward the exit of her room, confidently telling herself that there is absolutely no sense in dilly-dallying any longer. Elizabeth happily hums a small tune to herself as she steps outside. Meanwhile, Leonid roars intensely nearby with a fierce and heavy expression. Birds chirp cheerfully as the bright morning sun slowly rises above the dense tree line, casting long rays of light across the open sky. Meanwhile, Christheart introduces himself as the official lord of this village. He gestures toward his butler, Daniel, reflecting that he lives a highly elegant and comfortable life with him at the manor. Later that night, he smiles peacefully while snuggling into his bed for the evening. He reflects with absolute relief that one of his major worries was completely resolved when he entrusted the head knight with taking care of the local bandit problem, ensuring that he will sleep soundly tonight. However, the peaceful environment is instantly shattered as a barrage of violent thuds, cracks, and aggressive screams echoes loudly through the night. Christheart's face twitches with heavy irritation. Listening to the distant chaos, he angrily wonders exactly how many trees that man has cut down since he first arrived in this village, internally snapping that Leonid needs to save that noise for the morning and questioning whether he is actually a knight or a professional lumberjack. The 3 bandits sit tightly bound in heavy ropes against a large pillar on the stone floor, scowling in pure frustration after their defeat. A voice praises the head knight, declaring that the job was well done just as expected of him. Our guy turns to Christheart and asks if the situation is handled well enough. With a pleasant smile, Christheart thanks the knight and states that he and his butler, Daniel, will take full care of the remaining matters. Christheart suddenly pauses and tries to call out about the payment, urging the knight to wait. Completely ignoring the request, Leonid walks straight out the door with his white cape billowing behind him. He breaks into a slight sweat, unleashing a sharp whistle to summon his horse. Leonid shouts out aggressively to call for his dark horse, Florestano. Elizabeth sits quietly on a wooden crate out by the countryside fence. She looks downward, internally grumbling that Leonid is late. Our girl continues drawing small circles in the dirt with a stick, noting with frustration that despite Leonid explicitly planning to meet at 5 in the morning, it is already 9 o'clock. She stares off into the distance, internally reflecting that she should have just gone ahead without him even if he was only 5 minutes late. She realizes that at this rate, she will completely miss the morning market, leaving her to wonder why she is still waiting so earnestly. Elizabeth's irritation grows as she sharply pulls her hair, bitterly reflecting on how she always firmly believed he was a person who truly valued time. A sudden hoarse neigh breaks the silence, catching Elizabeth completely by surprise as she turns around on her wooden crate. She watches as Leonid comes riding up at a full sprint, the heavy thud of hooves kicking up dust behind them. Our guy aggressively charges forward atop his horse. Elizabeth stares ahead with a deeply upset expression as Leonid quickly dismounts his horse. Our girl opens her mouth wide and yells loudly that Leonid is awfully late. Looking back, a worried Leonid softly offers his apology. Elizabeth turns her back in deep frustration and demands to know if he simply wanted to sleep again after waking up. Leonid stares downward with a completely blank expression. Our girl continues shouting aggressively, thinking to herself that he should just make up an excuse. She yells out that she was foolish for believing him and waiting for him all this time. Leonid softly questions if she actually waited for him. Hearing this, a heavily irritated Elizabeth stands completely still. She stubbornly turns away and pouts with her arms crossed, declaring that she always keeps her promises. Facing her back, Leonid firmly asserts that he kept their promise after all. Elizabeth sighs deeply as she reflects that they can no longer make it to the morning market, adding with disappointment that the midday market will also be out of reach. Leonid steps in close beside his dark horse and sternly orders her to get on. Our guy breaks into a slight sweat, as he firmly insists that they can still make it in time for the midday market. Elizabeth widens her eyes in sudden shock and panic as she is abruptly pulled along. She stutters out in complete surprise, desperately calling for him to wait. Our guy commands them to go as he fiercely guides the reins of his dark horse, driving the animal forward into a sudden dash. Trailing closely behind him on the saddle, Elizabeth gasps out in pure panic, frantically yelling to hold on because going at full speed is terrifying. Blushing deeply from the sudden movement, Elizabeth clings firmly to Leonid's back, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist to secure herself. Leonid yells out loudly for her to hold on tight, warning that she might bite her tongue if she tries to talk. Elizabeth reacts with a sudden blush, instantly squeezing her lips shut in surprised compliance. The dark horse gallops smoothly down a wide path alongside a sweeping green hill, carrying both riders. She internally reflects that Florestano is incredibly fast and good, happily realizing that at this rapid pace they might actually make it to the market in time. The journey continues down the open road. Elizabeth keeps her eyes wide with focus as she tightly locks her arms around Leonid's waist. The heavy thud of hooves echoes across the land as the dark horse leaps rapidly forward. The visual shifts to a bustling, crowded port market filled with the loud chatter of merchants displaying fresh fish, workers unloading large cargo boats, and seagulls flying overhead. Our girl breaks out into a bright smile, happily celebrating that the market is thankfully still open, while a stoic Leonid walks quietly right behind her. She turns back toward Leonid, firmly declaring that as his official punishment for being late, he will be joining her for all of her shopping today since she has a massive amount of items to gather. Leonid lets out a small sweat drop and calmly agrees to the task. Elizabeth enthusiastically leads the way through the market stalls, eagerly browsing through bags of produce and hanging goods while Leonid follows behind, holding their initial purchases. Soon after, they stop at a fabric stall where Elizabeth carefully inspects a roll of cloth presented by a smiling saleswoman. He stands completely overwhelmed as he struggles to hold multiple large rolls of fabric in his arms. Looking back at him, Elizabeth carries a full bag of apples and suggests that they should finally head back and leave the heavy transport duties to Florestano. The visual shifts to a spice merchant's stall where a bowl of white powder sits on the counter beside a traditional balance scale. Looking at the ingredient, the merchant asks if she is looking for sugar, but flatly states that he does not sell it to commoners. Elizabeth clasps her hands together anxiously, desperately begging him not to say such a harsh thing. Leonid steps up to the counter, extending his gloved fist forward as a chain jingles loudly. He calmly asks if this will be okay to complete the transaction, leaving the merchant sweating in sudden surprise. The merchant gazes downward in quiet shock as he looks at the item held out before him. He observes the characters reading the Knight of Lion clearly embedded across the surface of a pure silver tag. The sweating spice merchant immediately changes his tone, nervously asking how many bags she needs. Elizabeth happily requests 5 bags, and the merchant quickly agrees to prepare the order right away while Leonid stands silently behind her. Elizabeth and Leonid continue walking along the stone path of the busy port, where fishermen work with nets and wooden crates near the water. She calls out loudly to get someone's attention. Our girl waves her arms wide to mimic a wriggling motion, asking a nearby fisherman if he sells any octopus that looks like that. The fisherman looks up in surprise while a stoic Leonid watches the exchange from behind. The fisherman presents a large, wet octopus peering out from a wooden container, explaining that he found it on a net this morning and wondering if this is the creature she wants. Elizabeth happily declares that it is exactly what she was looking for, expressing her immense relief. The fisherman watches the large octopus squirming inside the bucket, curiously asking what she plans to do with the creature. He notes that the animal was just winding and clinging around, adding that he was originally planning to eat it himself. Suddenly, the slimy octopus slithers completely out of the container and lands squarely on Leonid's head. Leonid maintains a silent, angry posture as he aggressively grips the octopus to yank it off his face. Witnessing this, a panicked Elizabeth waves her hands frantically, desperately begging him not to be so rough because she wants to take the creature back home completely alive. With a loud pop, Leonid forcefully pulls the wriggling octopus away from his head. Multiple rows of perfectly circular suction cup marks are left deeply stamped across his face. Elizabeth initially tries to hold back a puff of laughter. Ultimately unable to control herself, she bursts out into a loud fit of laughter while standing right in front of Leonid. Wiping a tear from her eye, Elizabeth laughs that the great head knight has such a funny face. Facing away slightly, Leonid rubs the back of his neck and remains completely silent. As evening sets over the port, the sun begins to dip below the horizon. Leonid sits restfully on a stone wall next to his dark horse, turning his head slightly as a rustling sound prompts a voice to call out his name. Our girl approaches the stone wall, thanking Leonid for his help today and expressing her gratitude for him carrying all of the luggage from the vendor. Looking back toward her, Leonid calmly offers a brief word of agreement. She holds her cup and smiles brightly, admitting that the trip was only supposed to be a simple observation but noting with amusement that it turned into quite a disaster. Leonid silently repeats the word observation to himself. Elizabeth looks out over the glistening water under the evening sky, noting that it is no use for Leonid to act like he does not know anything. She calls it too bad and asks if he truly thought she would escape to the port leading outside of the country. Our girl turns back with a bright smile, happily explaining that her current life is very fun and declaring that she has absolutely no intention of running away. This sudden statement catches Leonid completely off guard. Suddenly realizing the true meaning behind her words, a startled Leonid blurts out her name in surprise. Elizabeth gasps out loud in sudden panic as she accidentally chokes on her drink. Our girl sweats nervously as she reflects internally that it was a very close call. She quickly makes an excuse by pointing out that he lives in the exact same place too, hastily apologizing for drinking far too fast while a sweating Leonid quietly accepts her explanation. The scene transitions to the dark countryside at night as Nortia Church stands silently under a vast, star-filled sky. Elizabeth stands in the kitchen, pondering what supplies she needs to keep on hand as she realizes there is still more work to do. A sudden, sharp knocking sound rings out through the room, drawing her immediate attention. Our girl opens the wooden door to find Christheart standing in the entrance with a polite, friendly expression. He greets her warmly, wishing her a good evening. She expresses her complete surprise at seeing the feudal lord visiting her at such an hour. Christheart explains that he wanted to personally confirm that there is nothing missing from the upcoming bazaar. Elizabeth tells him that she appreciates his concern, informing him that she has already purchased everything she needs together with Leonid. Christheart smiles and acknowledges her explanation. Christheart looks at Elizabeth, telling her that he is truly glad to see that Leonid is adapting well to life here in the village. She internally reflects on the situation, crossly declaring to herself that she absolutely will not wait for him anymore. Christheart listens to the conversation. He sighs softly, casually noting that he figured it would turn out exactly like that. Elizabeth turns her head, questioning what he means by that statement. He explains that everything began yesterday night. That guy reveals that Leonid discovered a group of bandits hiding out inside the forest and fought against them continuously until the morning hours. He cheerfully gestures, happily announcing that both the intruders and their secret hideout were completely wiped out. He notes that with the danger successfully resolved, they can finally hold the upcoming church bazaar without facing any external threats. Hearing the shocking news, a completely bewildered Elizabeth turns back and stutters out in pure disbelief. Elizabeth notes with sudden realization that Leonid did not say even a single word to her about fighting the bandits. He offers a warm, knowing smile as he explains that Leonid is simply that kind of person. He gently tells Elizabeth that this is exactly why he is comfortably leaving the head knight in her care, prompting her to stare back in complete silence. Steady footsteps click against the floor as she moves forward. Elizabeth stands outside in the dim night, suddenly turning her head with wide eyes as she calls out to Leonid. Our girl looks downward, firmly stating that Leonid should have at least made up a proper excuse for his behavior. Leonid rests his arms over his knees and looks away without saying a word. She calls out to Leonid in the quiet space, checking to see if he is all right. Leonid sits perfectly still with his eyes closed, softly snoring as he drifts into a deep sleep after his long night of fighting. Watching him from the side, a slightly blushing Elizabeth notes his exhaustion. Our girl sighs in mild exasperation, thinking to herself that Leonid is a truly foolish man who really ought to appeal more for his own heroic achievements. Elizabeth reaches her hand out and gently pokes the space right between his closed eyes. She wonders to herself if he could please stop keeping those persistent wrinkles on his forehead even while he is asleep. Leonid's eyes instantly snap wide open in a fierce flash of panic as the sudden touch startles him awake. The abrupt awakening catches Elizabeth completely off guard. A fully alert Leonid instantly scans his surroundings, frantically demanding to know what is wrong and if there is a bandit nearby. Still trembling from the scare, a heavily sweating Elizabeth yells out in frustration, begging him to please not wake up so suddenly. Leonid adjusts his hair with a serious expression, calmly noting that he understands now and realizes he was simply sleeping. Elizabeth sits on the ground nearby. A heavy silence falls between them as Leonid catches a sudden glimpse of Elizabeth's exposed legs. Our girl gasps with wide eyes as she suddenly realizes what is happening. Enraged, she clenches her fist and aggressively whacks Leonid on the head, loudly demanding to know exactly where he thinks he is looking. Elizabeth fumes with anger, declaring that she thought he was sorry but concluding that he is actually the absolute worst. Flat on the ground, a deeply embarrassed Leonid covers his head and frantically apologizes, explaining it was completely accidental because he merely looked straight in front of him, which only causes a panicked Elizabeth to shriek out in shock that he really did see it. A loud scream echoes through the dark evening air outside the stone walls. Standing near a grand carriage, Christhart and his butler Daniel turn their heads in surprise as the sudden shout cuts through the quiet night. Christhart watches in complete amazement as the formidably strong head knight prostrates himself flat on the dirt, deeply bowing in front of a church sister. He reflects on how he explicitly told the two of them to try and get along. Walking close behind him, the butler Daniel observes the ongoing dispute and chuckles softly, noting that it seems like the pair still requires quite a bit of help. Elizabeth states that it is fine since he clearly had fun looking at her. A heavily sweating Leonid stands directly behind her in absolute panic, his face flushing bright red as he attempts to stutter out an explanation. Time passes steadily across the countryside village as the day of the church bazaar officially arrives. Inside the busy preparation area, two neatly rolled paper banners sit ready on a table. Our girl smiles brightly, raising a fist with absolute enthusiasm as she stands in front of the gathered market supplies. She happily announces that the bazaar will begin shortly. The scene shifts to a special side story focused on the pair riding together. The dark horse Florestano stands quietly, completely packed down under an immense load of heavy market purchases. Elizabeth looks upward with a sweating face, noting that since they have accumulated so many heavy purchases, they will no longer be able to ride the horse together. She feels terrible for Florestano under such a heavy load. Our girl looks out toward the busy street, suggesting that they should probably rent a nearby wagon to successfully carry all of their heavy goods back home. Hearing the plan, Leonid briefly responds from the side that it sounds like a good idea. Elizabeth coordinates the transport by requesting the driver to take the load to Nortia Church. The wagon driver handles the reins and cheerfully agrees to the task. Nearby, Elizabeth stands on the road while a mounted Leonid waits quietly on his dark horse. Our girl happily climbs up onto the dark horse behind Leonid, noting that they can take their time following the wagon back. As she settles onto the saddle, her hands firmly squeeze around Leonid's waist. Leonid freezes in sudden shock and lets out a panicked gasp. Elizabeth breaks into a nervous sweat, loudly pointing out that he explicitly told her to hold on tight earlier. Leonid turns back and stutters out that he knows he did, but the situation has completely changed. Our guy looks over his shoulder, admitting that he fully expected her to ride comfortably inside the wagon instead. Elizabeth quickly hops off the dark horse. Our girl looks at Leonid's face, loudly remarking that of course he would prefer to be alone with his beloved horse on the way home, especially since she made him spend all day shopping with her. A bewildered Leonid stutters out in response, trying to object to her words. Elizabeth cheerfully runs off, waving her arms as she calls out that she will simply relax inside the wagon and see him later. A startled Leonid reaches his hand out from atop his horse, frantically calling for her to wait up while the rented wagon sits waiting ahead. Our guy rests a hand against his face in mild exhaustion, as he internally reflects that he completely messed up the situation. He admits to himself that he never imagined she would actually choose to ride along on the horse for the way back too, especially after he previously told her to hold on tight. Leonid places a hand over his stomach. He reflects deeply in absolute silence, wondering to himself if Elizabeth was truly holding on to him the entire time during their journey. He reflects that he was simply so focused on making it to the port market in time that he completely failed to pay any attention to her touch. Leonid slumps forward in his saddle, letting out a heavy sigh of absolute defeat. Inside the rented wagon, a rhythmic clatter and heavy clunks echo loudly as the vehicle travels along the bumpy road. Surrounded by boxes of apples, jars, and stacked crates of marketplace goods, Elizabeth sits quietly on the wooden floorboards. Our girl pouts in irritation. She grumbles to herself that Leonid is an incredibly uptight guy, reflecting that it would have been perfectly fine for her to just ride home with him anyway. She quickly tries to convince herself that it is definitely not because she actually enjoyed riding closely behind him on the horse or anything like that. Sitting alone, Elizabeth fumes with a red face and tightly clenched fists. She makes a defensive excuse to herself, thinking that because she was a noble for such a long time, it simply never occurred to her that she could ride inside a wagon instead. Back at the church grounds, Lucinda stands by the entrance holding a broom, excitedly leaning forward with wide eyes. She happily reports to Roxanne that she saw the pair take off together on a horse, prompting a completely surprised Roxanne to look over and question if they were truly riding together. Lucinda clasps her hands together, daydreaming out loud about how wonderful it would be to ride together with a prince on a black horse even if the animal is not white. Standing nearby, Hilda holds her broom and quietly tells Lucinda to keep it down over there, while another church sister mutters nervously in response. Hilda listens to the ongoing gossip. She reflects quietly to herself, noting that while she initially wondered how the young woman would manage to get along here, it truly seems like things are going pretty well after all. Roxanne turns her head as a sound catches her attention, announcing that it looks like the travelers have officially returned. Hearing this, the other church sisters immediately drop their sweeping duties and eagerly rush toward the fence, loudly chattering and wondering if the pair really arrived together. Roxanne looks out toward the road and flatly points out that the travelers are actually riding separately. Hearing this unexpected news, a wide-eyed Lucinda reacts with loud disappointment, frantically asking why that is the case. Standing nearby, Hilda looks on with a slightly concerned expression as she internally wonders what could have happened to Lady Elizabeth. The grand bell tower of Nortia Church stands under a bright sky as the church bells ring out loudly to signal the start of the event. Outside on the decorated grounds, a young boy grumbles to his mother that he is already tired of having his sister's cookies again. The mother reminds him that he was the one who insisted they should attend in the first place. The boy sighs and keeps his hands behind his head, muttering that he wants to go home anyway even though they already walked all this distance. Inside the lively market area, the church sisters cheerfully present their unique treats to the visitors. Lucinda holds up sticks of grilled corn with a wide, happy smile. Meanwhile, Roxanne proudly hands out wrapped cookies, prompting a young girl to excitedly point out that the treats are shaped exactly like cats. Elizabeth turns back with a playful wink and a bright smile, asking her companion if he thinks that this time's bazaar is a little bit different from before. Nearby, the young boy looks up at the scene with wide, blushing eyes of pure amazement. He eagerly tugs on his mother's dress to announce that he wants to try that treat too, receiving a calm and patient reply as they walk along. Our girl smiles softly as she reflects that a bazaar happens in the church once every 3 months. She looks toward the stone statue outside, noting that the sisters make sweets, the villagers sell bazaar products, and various merchants come together to set up the market stalls. Striking a confident pose, she declares to herself that she will not let anyone say she has poor mannerisms now that she has come here. She flashes a bright expression, deeply determined to make everyone witness her absolute capability as an event planner from a different world. Meanwhile, a passing child points in confusion and asks his mother what she is doing, prompting the mother to quickly suggest they go somewhere else. At the front stalls, Hilda works with a steady smile, carefully spinning a wooden stick inside a large bowl to craft fresh sweets. The unique display immediately catches the attention of a young boy, who loudly shouts to his companion that they are selling clouds over there. Shocked by the claim, another child looks toward the booth in complete disbelief, exclaiming that there is no way they could possibly sell actual clouds. Elizabeth rests a hand against her chin and winks. The children cheer in absolute wonder that the shop really sells clouds, happily noting that the treat melts instantly when put in the mouth and tastes incredibly sweet. Observing their excitement, Elizabeth reflects to herself that cotton candy is thoroughly liked by children no matter where they are, confidently concluding it was entirely the right decision to place the store directly near the entrance. At the front counter, Lucinda grins warmly, enthusiastically telling the gathered audience to look closely. Intrigued by her words, 3 young children peer over the edge of the table with wide, curious eyes as they watch her prepare the next item. Inside the active workspace, the children peer closely at the small yellow kernels, questioning if it is simply normal corn and wondering if the food is being fried. Lucinda explains to her audience that while the ingredients may look like entirely normal corn, this specific selection is actually completely magical. With a playful wink, Lucinda lifts the heavy pot lid with her mittened hand to present a massive bowl overflowing with freshly popped treats. The young audience cheers loudly in absolute wonder, celebrating that the magical corn has successfully popped into white shapes that look exactly like small flowers. Standing proudly beside the booth, Elizabeth listens to the praise with a satisfied smile. The excited young boy points forward and tells his mother that he wants to eat that food too. The mother firmly responds that he must choose only one treat from the market, prompting the disappointed child to whine loudly in response while Elizabeth watches. A crowd gathers near the next decorated counter, where 2 women look over the display in complete surprise. One woman tells her companion to look at the unique candy, prompting the other to marvel at the fact that the treats are actually quite huge. The woman admiring the large treats proclaims that their beauty resembles a jewel and notes that they have an incredibly crispy texture. Her companion adds that more than anything else, this selection is a special product which the lady made cheerfully, confidently concluding that the item is completely out of this world. Hearing the praise, Rosetta snaps back, shouting that they did not need to say the last part and demanding to know if their comments were entirely intentional. Caught off guard by her sudden anger, the 2 women immediately offer a nervous apology as they stand before the booth. Farther down the line, the excited young boy looks at his options and happily tells his mother that he wants to eat that specific selection, deciding that they should go with that treat. The mother smiles warmly and quickly agrees to the request. Our girl smiles contentedly. She reflects internally that although the response is a bit of an overreaction, the steady flow of people through the market is going very well. She notes to herself with deep satisfaction that even her special Japanese Sakura plan is proving to be a massive success. Elizabeth looks out over the wide church grounds as the crowded bazaar continues in full swing beneath the hanging flags. She smiles softly to herself, noting that everything is progressing exactly like this. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out her name from across the busy square, drawing her immediate attention. Leonid stands near the stall, informing Elizabeth that the custom copper plate has officially warmed up and is ready for use. Elizabeth brightens up instantly and happily announces that she will be going over now. She turns around and firmly ties the ribbon of a white apron around her waist, resolving to herself that it is finally time to help out at the food stall. She stands proudly behind the counter next to Leonid, calling out loudly to gather the crowd's attention. She spreads her arms wide over the massive copper tray and enthusiastically declares to the gathering villagers that she will now make a very special dish. Intrigued by the sudden announcement, the passing villagers turn their heads in curiosity, wondering what kind of special food she could possibly be preparing. Meanwhile, Elizabeth holds a small brush and begins applying oil with swift, steady strokes across the rounded circular areas of the large copper tray. She pours a thick white batter with a large metal ladle, entirely covering the rounded holes of the hot copper plate. The gathered onlookers watch the process with wide eyes, completely puzzled by the unfamiliar cooking style. Elizabeth breaks into a small sweat as she works, noting that the mixture poured onto the copper plate is made of flour, water, and eggs mixed with chopped green onions. She gathers the next ingredient bowl and announces to the curious crowd that it is time for the next step. She drops small pieces of sliced octopus directly into the bubbling batter. A young boy in the crowd watches in surprise, asking what she just placed on the food. Elizabeth chuckles playfully and tells the boy that it is a secret. She reflects to herself that if she reveals the truth, the boy probably will not eat it. She explains that once the mixture gets firm, it must be turned around while making a hole to the other side of it. Standing proudly before the curious crowd, she smiles and calls out for everyone's attention. Beside her, Leonid watches the display with a completely blank expression. Elizabeth unleashes her secret technique, moving her hands with blinding speed to flip the treats inside the tray. The children stare ahead with wide eyes and open mouths, completely captivated by the impressive technique. Elizabeth smiles with a satisfied look while successfully placing the finished round treats onto a plate. She proudly notes that the trick to forming a perfect circle is simply to move the food frequently. She turns toward Leonid with a bright smile, handing over the tools and announcing that she will leave the rest of the cooking duties to him now. Our guy looks back at her in surprise, calmly agreeing to take over the stall. Leonid focuses intently as he follows the recipe instructions carefully. He prepares the base by putting on some sauce, vegetables, spices, and a little bit of honey. Next, he sprinkles on green laver dried under the sun as a substitute for sea lettuce. Finally, he drizzles on mayonnaise made from egg, oil, vinegar, and salt, noting that these toppings are simple yet highly popular. He passes a finished plate to an excited young boy, sweating slightly as he tells him to be careful with the hot food. In the background, Elizabeth watches the exchange happily while the local guests stand nearby. Watching the busy stall from a short distance, Christheart stares silently at the scene. Eating a candy lollipop, Christheart looks over toward the booth and notes that the head knight is currently busy sprinkling sea lettuce. Standing right beside him with a cotton candy stick, Daniel smiles peacefully and notes that things are going quite well for Leonid. He notices a large cat costume walking up behind them, instantly calling out in recognition that it is the feudal lord. The person inside the cat costume speaks through the mask, thanking them very much for visiting the church bazaar. Looking completely puzzled alongside Roxanne, Christheart nervously asks who they might be. The cat quickly apologizes. The person inside the cat suit introduces himself directly as the priest, Moritz. Christheart reacts with sudden shock. A young boy nearby points at the mascot in surprise, loudly exclaiming to a young girl that he just heard a very strange voice coming out of that cat. Roxanne steps closer and quietly whispers to the mascot that Nikonayan is supposed to act entirely like a real cat. Hearing the reminder, the priest keeps his paws raised and stays completely silent under his mask. The priest instantly switches to a completely different, high-pitched voice, raising his paws playfully as he tells Christheart to please enjoy his time here at the bazaar. Christheart stands in complete disbelief, offering a quiet word of thanks in return. He reflects that some sacrifices are clearly needed for the ultimate success of the bazaar. Standing nearby, Daniel calmly puffs a cloud of smoke and wonders if Lord Christheart might wear that identical costume too, to which he instantly responds that he does not think so. Elizabeth lets out a sigh of relief, noting that the first wave of customers is finally finished. She turns toward the side and presents a steaming dish, calling out to Leonid to take the food. Leonid looks back in mild surprise as she hands over the plate. She smiles brightly as she explains that this massive selection is meant entirely for his portion. She notes with a cheerful expression that his plate is specially packed with many pieces because she had him help out with all the heavy lifting and transport after all. Leonid looks down at the plate and offers a quiet word of thanks. He blushes slightly while focusing on her words, silently reflecting on the fact that she made a special portion just for him. Elizabeth smiles and reminds him to be careful because the food is still incredibly hot, noting that she gave the exact same warning to the children earlier. Completely ignoring the advice, Leonid immediately takes a large bite and chomps down on the treat. The extreme heat takes an instant toll on Leonid, causing his entire face to turn bright red as steam pours out of his mouth. Our girl panics in absolute shock, loudly screaming at Leonid to hold on and demanding to know if he seriously just ate the entire boiling hot treat whole. She frantically orders him to spit it out at once, warning that his tongue will get severely burned. Meanwhile, a deeply sweating Leonid stands in silence with puffed cheeks, firmly resolving to himself that there is absolutely no way he will ever spit out something that Elizabeth personally made for him. Leonid huffs lightly as steam blows out of his mouth from the hot food. She stares forward, grumbling to herself that this person hogs any food he sees. She fields a sideways glance, internally adding that it is absolutely not her fault if he burns his tongue. Our girl tells Leonid that he should take a break and eat the rest of the food slowly inside the church. She gestures forward, asking him if he can please bring the additional ingredients from the kitchen on his way back. Holding a hand to his mouth as he exhales hot steam, Leonid calmly accepts the request. The scene transitions inside the quiet building beneath the grand bell tower of Nortia Church. Leonid sits by himself on a wooden ledge inside a storage room filled with glass bottles and barrels, calmly poking a small pick into one of the round treats to eat his lunch. Our guy steadily blows on the hot treat held up on his stick to cool it down before eating. He chews on the snack with puffed cheeks, softly reflecting to himself that the food tastes incredibly good. Leonid continues eating his meal, quietly reflecting that the texture is actually not bad. However, as he chews the snack with puffed cheeks, he begins to wonder why it tastes so uniquely familiar. He walks deeper into the kitchen area to look for the supplies Elizabeth requested. He spots a large silver mixing bowl on the counter and decides that these must be the additional ingredients. As Leonid looks around the wooden table, he mutters in confusion. Right next to the cabinets, a clean wooden cutting board sits with a sharp knife and chopped pieces of a tentacle resting on top. Suddenly, he notices a massive, wriggling arm creeping directly out from beneath the structure. Leonid breaks into a sudden sweat as he realizes this is exactly where the creature went to, while the giant octopus glares back maliciously, reflecting on the fact that the knight just ate its other half a moment ago. Clutching his bowl tightly against his chest, a startled Leonid instantly turns back walking. Elizabeth smiles warmly as Christheart tells her that the bazaar is a great success entirely thanks to her efforts. She quickly deflects the praise, stating that it is mostly because of him as the Earl, and notes that Sir Daniel helped her out a lot as well. Nearby, a friendly Daniel waves his hand to guide two young men into a proper line at the front counter. He looks at Elizabeth with a gentle smile, noting that in reality, ever since she arrived here in Nortia, he feels like the entire town of Clawlaris has changed in a very good way. Blushing deeply, a flustered Elizabeth looks away, insisting that there is no way that is true because she only wanted the people to have fun. Christheart gestures lightly with an open hand, reassuring Elizabeth that she really does not have to be so modest about her achievements. Suddenly, a glaring Leonid casts a fierce and intensely dark shadow right over them. Spotting the terrifyingly stern look on the head knight's face, a sweating Christheart smiles nervously while internally panicking, wondering if Leonid is trying to kill him for the comment. He gestures lightly while standing by the empty food stall, noting with relief that it seems the bazaar will end safely. He prepares to continue speaking, adding that more than anything, a sudden sound cuts off his sentence. Nearby, the heavy ropes securing the wooden market pillars aggressively snap apart. A sudden crack echoes through the square as a massive wooden beam gives way entirely, plunging downward. Christheart and Elizabeth look upward with startled, sweating faces as the giant log falls toward them. Moving with blinding speed, a powerful hand reaches out and aggressively pulls Elizabeth away from the path of the crashing timber. Our guy forcefully blocks the giant falling beam with his wrapped forearm, completely shielding Elizabeth beneath his tall frame. Sweating slightly from the sudden exertion, Leonid lets out a heavy breath and notes that the situation was incredibly close. Our girl breaks into a nervous sweat. She offers a quiet word of gratitude, thanking him very much for saving her. Elizabeth lets go of Leonid's arm as he steps back with a sweating face. Leonid resolves that next time, he absolutely has to make a much stronger tent. She stands under a cloud of mild stress, noting to herself that she needs to pick up the loose cloth from the ground. Meanwhile, Leonid quietly lifts a support beam to put the market booth structure back together again. Christheart walks ahead with a tired sigh, grumbling to himself that he wants to throw up some sugar after eating so many sweet treats. Hearing the comment, Daniel holds out a plate of food and asks him if he would like some of these treats too, prompting Christheart to quickly change his mind and agree that he should get one. The scene transitions outside to the stone statue as evening sets over the village. After that, the gathered crowds of local villagers finally head back home, and the church bazaar officially ends in great success. The local people leave the courtyard with their stomachs completely full, while a departing boy enthusiastically calls back that they will gladly return next time. Reflecting on the day, the narration notes that the marketplace merchants also profited a lot from the bazaar. Elizabeth glances backward with a quiet look as Leonid stands calmly right by her side. Leonid feels her steady gaze and wonders silently what she is currently thinking. She turns her head toward Leonid with a warm smile. The sudden, kind expression catches Leonid completely by surprise. Leonid stands in silence and rubs the back of his neck, feeling a bit flustered as he steadily looks away. A short distance behind them, the church sisters watch the pair walk together. Lucinda giggles happily while resting her hand by her face. A bright, single star sparkles brightly in the darkening evening sky directly above the grand stone bell tower of Nortia Church. Elizabeth reflects internally that things will likely be like this from now on, noting that while it is not something flashy, she truly hopes that this kind of sparkling and enjoyable lifestyle would continue. The scene transitions far away to the grand towers of Moor's royal palace under the dark night sky. Inside a large, elegant bedroom labeled as Princess Rosetta's room, a young woman lies down restfully across a cushioned lounge chair. Suddenly, a sharp knocking sound rings out right through the quiet space, causing Rosetta to instantly open her eyes wide in surprise. Rosetta rushes out onto the balcony, looking down into the courtyard in absolute surprise as the double doors fly open. Standing outside on the stone tiles under the night sky, Claude looks back up at her. Claude smiles gently and tells Rosetta that he has come to pick her up just as she wished. A blushing Rosetta gasps out his name in pure shock, her eyes sparkling with amazement. Claude calls out to Rosetta from below the stone balcony, prompting an emotional response as she cries out his name in return. Rosetta suddenly throws herself completely over the stone railing, desperately screaming for Claude to take her with him and run away. Moving with perfect timing, Claude firmly catches her in his arms. Cradling her closely amidst the roses, Claude gazes lovingly into her eyes and promises that he would do absolutely anything if it is as she wishes, softly proposing that they finally get married. Rosetta happily calls out his name once more. Cradled securely in Claude's arms, Rosetta hugs his neck tightly and speaks softly to him. Claude looks down, asking what is on her mind. Rosetta explains that although their marriage is heavily opposed by many, there is a specific place within Remai's kingdom where couples can officially register their marriage completely without their parents' consent. She struggles to recall the exact details, trying to remember the precise name of the location. Rosetta happily declares that the destination they need to reach is none other than Nortia Church. The pair stands together holding hands under a vast, star-filled night sky. Hearing the destination, Claude firmly notes that if that is the case, they can easily stop by that specific location and arrive there directly by carriage at dawn. Rosetta praises his quick planning, while a deeply devoted Claude smiles and reassures his beloved Rosetta that he would gladly prepare absolutely anything for her. They declare that they are heading straight toward their love's sacred place. Together, the ecstatic couple loudly announces their final destination, cheering that they are officially on their way to Nortia Church. Meanwhile, Elizabeth breaks into a nervous sweat while holding a circular dish, sniffing the air intently as she reflects internally that she just smelled a great amount of roses. Standing directly beside her with a stack of plates, Hilda points out with a focused look that Elizabeth's hands have completely stopped moving. A carriage travels down from the mountainous border. Nearby, birds chirp peacefully while resting on a tree branch, highlighting a journey where there is absolutely no time for fear. The only thought occupying the travelers' minds is the anticipation of joyous bells ringing in their future. Inside the carriage, Princess Rosetta stirs awake and lets out a soft murmur. Smiling gently by her side, Claude greets her warmly, wishing a good morning to his princess. Rosetta blushes deeply and looks at her companion. Rubbing her eye, the princess questions if they have finally reached the church. Holding her hand, Claude explains that while they have not arrived yet, they have successfully crossed the border and will be out of the woods very soon. Claude glances out the window as the carriage rumbles loudly through the dense forest. He reflects internally that their journey will remain safe as long as they do not encounter any dangerous bandits hidden among the trees. Rosetta looks over with a wide, startled expression as she suddenly reaches forward. With a radiant smile, Rosetta happily declares that he should not worry because no one will interfere with them. She clasps her hands together passionately, confidently proclaiming that absolutely nothing can get in the way of their love, prompting a gentle response from Claude as he looks at her. The heavy carriage wheels crunch loudly against the unpaved ground as the vehicle speeds along. The narration reflects that Elizabeth, having been completely tossed into the far corner of oblivion, had finally been freed from the heavy obligations of nobility. However, the narrator reveals that unbeknownst to Elizabeth, the ecstatic couple was already coming, loudly clattering directly toward her with noisy carriage wheels. Inside the grand cathedral, tall arched windows illuminate the rows of empty pews lining the main aisle. Standing back with a happy smile, Elizabeth wipes the sweat from her forehead and cheerfully declares that she has finally finished polishing the statue of the goddess. Elizabeth reflects on how the main religion of this world, particularly in the Remaiser kingdom and the village of Moires where she has been banished, centers around worshipping idols of the goddess Helvela. Roxanne and Lucinda carry decorative items as they move through the building. The narration notes that the statue of the goddess holds lilies that are said to turn into a protective sword for the continent, which is why people offer prayers, share their daily lives at Mass, ask for favors, receive blessings for infants, and hold memorials for the dead. The priest, Moritz, stands by the altar and praises everyone for their hard work, announcing that it is nearly time for the expected guests to arrive. Hearing the reminder, she looks back over her shoulder and quickly responds that they are right on it. Lucinda crossly folds her arms and wonders aloud who the happy couple could be. Roxanne calmly stands right beside her, noting that whoever they may be, the church sisters will perform their sacred duties all the same. She playfully winks and points a finger, enthusiastically adding that no matter who the visitors are, their absolute specialty here at Nortia Church is handling elopements. Listening to the statement, Elizabeth pauses with a neutral expression as she suddenly realizes the truth behind her words. Elizabeth reflects deeply on how it is normally impossible to get married in this world without direct parental approval, noting that if parents approve, someone can be married off completely against their own feelings, resulting in a large number of strategic marriages for political convenience. A series of simple instructional diagrams illustrates the two traditional requirements for a legal marriage. The first condition requires the couple to explicitly say their vows with the goddess acting as an official witness while the clergyman writes a certificate. The second condition dictates performing the wedding ceremony directly in front of parents who have explicitly given their approval. The narration reveals that despite the strict rules of the kingdom, there is actually a special way to get around these two demanding conditions. A geographical map illustrates the neighboring territories, detailing that in the kingdom of Moires, both conditions for marriage must be strictly met. However, in the kingdom of Remaiser, the law treats the second condition regarding parental approval as completely optional. Because of this loophole, couples who cannot obtain parental approval can successfully get married if they hold their wedding here. Our girl clasps her hands together, blushing as she reflects that the eloping couple soon to arrive will be her very first wedding since becoming a nun here. Elizabeth glances over at Moritz, happily reflecting that the priest has been in exceptionally high spirits all day. She fondly recalls how he dynamically performed in his falsetto cat voice back during the church bazaar. Standing near the aisle, she wonders who the lucky two will be to walk down the red carpet. She thinks to herself that they might be nobility, or perhaps a merchant's daughter and a boy who handles cargo, concluding that the idea of a marriage crossing social classes is deeply romantic in any world. Elizabeth enthusiastically pumps her fist, resolving to do her absolute best as a sister to provide a beautiful wedding ceremony no matter who the couple turns out to be. She eagerly welcomes any dramatic issues or soap opera twists that might come her way. Suddenly, a loud and heavy knocking echoes aggressively through the door. Standing outside the entrance, Claude calls out loudly to check if the priest is present within the church. He explains to the household that he was the person who sent the advance notification via carrier pigeon a few days prior. The church gathering bursts into a flurry of sudden excitement as the local children joyfully cheer that the expected guests have finally arrived. Lucinda happily celebrates their long-awaited arrival while Hilda firmly commands everyone in the room to remain on their absolute best behavior. Moritz turns back and urgently instructs Elizabeth to attend to the entrance gate. Elizabeth immediately responds to the priest, declaring that she is right on it and will open the door for their guests right away. She firmly places her hands on the heavy frames to pull the structure open. She reflects that on the exact opposite side of this gate stand two people who are completely ready to pledge their undying love to each other. With a bright smile, Elizabeth pulls the entrance doors open. She warmly announces that they have been waiting for them, welcoming the travelers to Nortia Church after their long and hard journey. Our girl happily gestures for the guests to please come inside. A heavy silence instantly falls over the threshold as Elizabeth stares blankly at the couple. Acting on pure instinct, she suddenly slams the heavy doors shut, leaving a sweating Moritz completely startled by her frantic behavior. Seeking an explanation, Elizabeth immediately cracks the doors open once more to verify what she just saw. Our girl peers out cautiously from the small gap between the doors, while Claude and Princess Rosetta look back toward her with completely stunned expressions. She breaks into a nervous sweat and points a trembling finger forward, stuttering out in pure disbelief. Recognizing the sister standing before them, a shocked Rosetta covers her mouth while Claude looks on with a deeply startled face. Rosetta looks at her in complete confusion. She asks Elizabeth what she is doing here at this church. Elizabeth reacts with sudden shock. She loudly yells back about what she herself is doing here, declaring that this village is exactly where Rosetta's father chose to banish her. Rosetta suddenly assumes Elizabeth came all this way just to interfere with her plans. Hearing this, a defeated Elizabeth covers her face in deep frustration, grumbling about why her life is like this and noting that she has been far too busy to even bother with something like that. She pouts defiantly and clings tightly to Claude's arm. She confidently declares that the love between Claude and her will successfully overcome absolutely anything standing in its way. Elizabeth looks on with a completely flat, exhausted expression. She listlessly dismisses the drama, thinking to herself that she is pretty much over it anyway and realizes she has completely mellowed out. She watches the young couple. She reflects to herself that since she was banished, she never actually saw which narrative route or ending Princess Rosetta ended up with, identifying her companion as Prince Claude. Our girl recalls that Prince Claude is the son of a former concubine, making him a sort of older brother figure to Princess Rosetta, though they are not related by blood. She suddenly remembers that he was not featured in the main Princess Dawn package, realizing with sudden shock that he was actually a secret character unlockable only after clearing all the other main routes. Rosetta and Claude happily embrace along the path. Elizabeth ponders the current situation deeply, concluding that this princess is far trickier than she originally thought. Our girl reflects that in her former life, she had only managed to successfully clear 3 of the main characters' routes, meaning she has absolutely no idea what the true love and passion between the two of them is supposed to be like. She reasons internally that whatever the circumstances may be, they are two people who have eloped, so the fact that they are valued guests of the church has not changed. Elizabeth switches to a professional manner, welcoming the couple to Nortia Church. She politely asks if they wish to have a marriage ceremony with the goddess Helvela as their official witness. They enthusiastically cheer her agreement. The local village children eagerly crowd around to welcome the couple and offer their congratulations. They happily hand over a beautiful bouquet, prompting a radiant Rosetta to thank them with immense delight. Elizabeth watches the warm exchange, realizing Princess Rosetta carries no ill will and simply took a wrong impression too far. Hilda steps forward with a booklet to briefly explain the various wedding plans they offer, to which Claude politely agrees. A wedding ceremony stands out as a deeply important life event. The narrator reflects that although an elopement traditionally prioritizes speed above all else, the church aims to provide a beautiful and memorable ceremony even under constraints of limited time and budget. The narrator confidently shares a grand goal to eventually take these custom elopement wedding services big time in the wedding industry. Hilda asks Claude what specific type of ceremony he has in mind for them. Claude hesitates momentarily before explaining that he desires something Princess Rosetta will remember for the rest of her life, yet remains within what he can reasonably afford right now. She immediately unrolls an illustrated scroll to present their top option. For their high-class guests, she highly recommends the gorgeous, fast, and easy plan, which fully covers food, a beautiful dress, and the all-important ring. Hilda begins speed-talking through the extensive legal and safety perks of the package. She explains that the plan features a one-night stay at the Duke of Clarera's villa, guarantees a prepared marriage certificate by the following morning, and organizes the entire village to watch for pursuers so they can rush the ceremony if anyone comes after them. Hearing the protective perks of the package, Rosetta cheers happily that they can have their ceremony in total peace. Claude blushes with a wide smile, eagerly requesting the gorgeous, fast, and easy plan right away. Hilda and our girl exchange sly, knowing grins as they look back at the couple. The two church sisters quietly celebrate having successfully sold their top-tier wedding plan. Lucinda runs down the hallway to announce that they are ready to proceed with the next step. Nearby, a man clears his throat as he prepares to present the custom jewelry options. The man presents a collection of custom rings to Rosetta, smiling warmly as he instructs her to choose a lovely ring for a lovely bride. He proudly notes that these pieces are his absolute pride and joy, crafted entirely by his own hands. Rosetta covers her mouth in surprise as her eyes trace over the variety of sparkling rings placed before her. She beams with excitement as she admires the items, happily exclaiming that they are incredibly cute. Pointing toward the display, Rosetta remarks that the choices with big jewels are especially cute. Watching her reaction from a distance, Elizabeth smiles and silently decides to put her down for two. Hobart explains that the rings come in a set, so there is one for the bridegroom as well. He offers to adjust the sizes and inscribe their names right away, prompting an enthusiastic response from Rosetta. Observing the interaction, Elizabeth thinks to herself that Hobart is really settling into his role, reflecting that blacksmiths are not just meant for weapons and cookware. Two beautiful bands sparkle brightly. Elizabeth reflects internally that she intentionally introduced the tradition of exchanging rings, which was not normally a part of weddings in this world, confidently concluding that a matching set truly makes for everlasting memories. Hobart politely bows and states that he will go make the final adjustments to the selected set of rings while expressing his gratitude for their business. Nearby, Hilda stands completely silent, methodically scribbling notes down on her pad. She reviews the wedding order directly with Claude. She systematically calculates the expenses, checking if he would like to review the total, combining the base fee for the chosen option and the newly selected pair of rings. Hilda unrolls the final ledger and flatly announces that the total comes out to an incredibly steep price. Hearing the enormous amount, a heavily sweating Claude completely freezes up in sheer financial shock. Observing his panic, Hilda quickly uses a quill to scribble adjustments on the document. She reassures Claude to have no fear, explaining that with today's custom package special, the actual total comes down to a much lower price. Hilda continues calculating the deductions, noting that by applying an official friends and family discount directly from Sister Elizabeth, they were able to successfully bring the final price down to this heavily reduced rate. Claude reacts in utter amazement, shouting in pure disbelief at the massive size of the discount. She offers a gentle smile, explaining that the church tries to avoid placing an undue financial burden on guests who are currently facing such dire circumstances. Deeply moved by her understanding manner, Claude tearfully clenches his hands together and expresses his immense gratitude for them taking care of absolutely everything. Elizabeth gives a sly thumbs up, reflecting on her pricing strategy. She reasons internally that if you start out with a cheap price, people will think your product is cheap, so it is best to set it a little high and slowly lower it, because everyone loves a bargain. Our girl addresses Claude and Rosetta, noting that they must be tired from their long trip. She invites them to refresh themselves with a celebratory gift of apple cider from Nortia Church as a cart stacked with glassware wobbles into the room behind them. Roxanne and Lucinda carefully wheel out a massive, multi-tiered pyramid of glass cups. Lucinda lets out a sigh of relief that it did not tip over, while an intrigued Princess Rosetta watches with a curious expression. The narrator notes that while it may not be champagne, this tower of cider goblets proves that even cheap beverages can look incredibly fancy depending on their visual presentation. Holding up a fizzing glass, a blushing Rosetta marvels at how beautiful it looks. She beams with pure joy while holding her glass, happily declaring that the sparkling bubbles look exactly like a special blessing from the goddess meant just for them. Claude blushes lightly and softly agrees with her words. Elizabeth chuckles quietly to herself. She reflects internally that while it was completely unexpected for their wedding guests to be actual members of the royal family, her special business plan for the nobility is going exactly as she had anticipated. She rests a thoughtful hand against her chin, continuing to plan how to make sure that their beautiful memories will completely outweigh the steep price of the ceremony. Suddenly, a heavy, echoing bang from the front of the sanctuary startles the room, causing a murmuring Elizabeth, Claude, Rosetta, and Hilda to instantly turn their heads toward the source. The travelers and the church sisters look out from inside the dark hallway to find a shadowy figure and a horse standing right at the bright entrance gates. Leonid officially reports to the gathered room that no intruders or pursuers have been detected in the surrounding area. Our girl lets out a soft sigh of relief, clutching her hands. She reflects internally that it is just Leonid, admitting that she initially thought it was a pursuer coming directly after their royal guests. Elizabeth nervously laughs off the scare, explicitly explaining that Leonid is actively cooperating to guard the church. She reassures the couple that because of his protection, he will absolutely not allow anyone who is unwelcome to enter the premises. Claude and Rosetta react with sudden surprise as they look toward the newly arrived guard. Claude stares ahead blankly with a wide eye, pausing to consider the situation deeply as he begins to wonder about the true reason behind Leonid's sudden presence. Recognizing the formidable warrior, a heavily sweating Claude immediately drops his head and bows deeply out of respect. He identifies the visitor as none other than the sacred lion, the great swordsman Sir Leonid. Rosetta gasps out loud in pure shock, as she realizes that this man is the head knight. She notes with absolute surprise that she thought she recognized him from somewhere, recalling that he was originally supposed to have left the royal castle completely. Elizabeth reflects in sheer horror that this development is the absolute worst possible thing that could have happened to their plan. An explanatory scroll breaks down the complicated dynamic between the figures from the kingdom of Moires. To put it simply, Prince Claude and Princess Rosetta are an eloping couple sharing a forbidden love toward Nortia Church, while Leonid serves as the formidable head knight responsible for maintaining absolute order. A sudden, terrible realization dawns on her as she pieces together what his presence truly implies. The horrifying reality hits her all at once that more than anyone else, he is actually the ultimate pursuer sent after the royal couple. Claude stands protectively in front of Rosetta and firmly declares that he will not hand her over. He looks ahead and warns that if anyone insists on taking her away, he is fully prepared to take on their lord as an opponent. He draws his sword from its scabbard. He grips his weapon tightly and loudly proclaims his absolute resolve to defend her. The tense atmosphere escalates as Leonid stares ahead silently. With steady concentration, Leonid reaches over his shoulder toward his weapon, prompting a panicked Elizabeth to frantically scream for him to wait and try to explain who the two guests are. Instead of attacking, our guy simply rubs the back of his neck with a tired sigh. He looks completely annoyed by the dramatic misunderstanding, grumbling aloud to ask what everyone is talking about and clarifying that he is not here for a fight. A heavy silence falls over the cathedral as Claude lets out a confused exclamation. Elizabeth calls out to Leonid in a questioning voice as he lets his hand drop from his neck. A noisy carriage wheel clatters loudly against the unpaved path outside, drawing the immediate attention. Christheart suddenly appears at the open carriage doorway with a warm smile, cheerfully welcoming the travelers to Nortia Church. He introduces himself as the local feudal lord and proudly announces that as a member of the nobility, he is fully pleased to be at their service as an official witness to their wedding ceremony, leaving a shocked Claude completely frozen in surprise. Claude and Rosetta stare straight ahead in complete disbelief. Christheart breaks into a nervous sweat as he internally reflects that having the Princess of Moires here puts him in an incredibly awkward position. He quickly smiles and invites the couple to go ahead and enjoy their stay regardless, prompting a hopeful Claude to ask if the two of them will officially turn a blind eye to their situation. Christheart looks back in mild confusion, quietly repeating the number 2 to himself. Standing near the door, a completely silent Leonid crossly folds his arms while listening to the conversation. Christheart smiles. He notes to himself that Leonid has successfully read between the lines, silently praising the head knight for learning how to handle the situation properly. He gently taps Leonid on the arm as he announces that it is time for them to take their leave. He explains to the room that since they are nobles, their continued presence at the church could easily trigger a massive national scandal. Christheart firmly grabs Leonid's arm and tries to pull him toward the exit with a heavy tug. Despite pulling multiple times with all of his strength, Leonid stands completely rooted to the spot with his arms crossed, remaining entirely unmoved by the effort. He panics internally over why the knight refuses to budge even a single millimeter from his spot. Christheart realizes Leonid did not actually read between the lines at all. He stares ahead blankly, utterly baffled by the knight's dense behavior and concluding that he simply does not understand how Leonid's mind works. He gestures frantically with his hands, desperately trying to convey his confusion over why the head knight refuses to move. In response, Elizabeth simply shrugs her shoulders and shakes her head with closed eyes, silently signaling that she does not know either. Our girl lets out a soft sigh of stress before turning to the eloping couple with a reassuring smile. She tells Claude and Rosetta not to worry because Leonid is actually on leave from his official duties as head knight, but quickly adds that since he is far too intimidating, they will simply have him leave the area right now. She firmly presses her hands, nervously requesting for Leonid to step outside for a minute. The sudden physical contact catches Leonid completely off guard, leaving him sweating. Elizabeth effortlessly slides the massive, heavily armed knight right out the double doors as if he were completely weightless. Watching the display from a distance, a thoroughly stunned Christheart reflects silently to himself that when Elizabeth pushes that human statue, he amazingly moves without any resistance at all. Taking control of the wedding preparations, Lucinda steps forward with a bright cheer and guides Claude away, announcing that it is finally time for the groom to meet directly with the priest. Simultaneously, Hilda gestures warmly toward Rosetta to lead her in a different direction, explaining that the bride will be putting on her wedding dress over in the next room. Elizabeth leads Leonid away. As they walk together, Leonid turns back slightly with a serious expression, remaining completely focused on her. She apologizes for having previously asked him to be present at the ceremony, but firmly explains that this time they do not need his help and requests that he please go home or return to the Count's manor. Leonid looks down with an annoyed frown and flatly states that he cannot do that. Elizabeth demands to know why. She steps closer to stare up at him, poking his chest while forcefully addressing him as Sir Leonid Gardhelm and reminding him that he has his own position to think about. She continues lecturing him, explaining that someone who has been appointed as a knight cannot simply appear at a wedding that the royal family is strictly against, adding that he should be far more aware of the fact that he is a noble himself. Our girl panics internally, realizing that she just completely messed up by telling him off exactly like she was still a high-ranking noble lady. Looking directly at Elizabeth, he asks with quiet intensity if she is actually worried for him. Elizabeth nervously stammers out an affirmation, sweating slightly as she tries to backpedal from her previous outburst. She quickly reminds Leonid that he and the Count both hold the title of high-ranking nobles, pointing out that by all means, he should not even be talking to her now that she is a commoner. Leonid flatly states that he does not care about that kind of thing. Elizabeth gasps in surprise, frantically demanding that he please care just a little bit right now and go away. The two stand together on the grassy field in complete silence, facing each other without moving. After a long pause, Leonid suddenly takes a small, literal slide backward, shifting only a tiny fraction of an inch away from his original spot. Our girl falls to her hands and knees in pure exhaustion, groaning internally that Leonid has got to be kidding her. She looks up in deep frustration and asks if he honestly thought that counted as going away, to which a completely blank Leonid questions if he should go 2 steps farther, prompting a defeated Elizabeth to grumble that it needs to be more like 2,000 steps. She exclaims that she is starting to think he actually wants to get in the way of the wedding ceremony. Leonid flatly objects that her guess is not correct. Puzzled by the denial, Elizabeth firmly asks him why he won't leave if that is the case. She sighs internally, reflecting that since she has learned Leonid is not good at speaking his mind, she is trying her best to get the truth out of him. She looks up and questions if he simply wants to see the wedding ceremony, to which Leonid instantly responds with a firm no. Leonid struggles to express himself. He suddenly drops to one knee on the grassy ground right in front of Elizabeth, hesitating as he begins to speak about what will happen if she proceeds. Our guy finally confesses that he is simply worried. The sudden, honest admission catches Elizabeth completely by surprise. She questions why he would be worried about her and wonders how that could possibly be the case under the present circumstances. Elizabeth quickly smiles and gestures with her hand to reassure him. She explicitly tells Leonid not to worry because she is absolutely not plotting anything against Princess Rosetta, despite having been banished to this village. Puzzled by her sudden response, a kneeling Leonid watches her in surprise as she speaks. Meanwhile, she reflects internally that it makes total sense for him to think that way, remembering that in this world she is considered the banished villainess. She reasons to herself that as the head knight, he is naturally just concerned that she might cause trouble if he isn't actively watching her. Our girl smiles and playfully flicks her wrist, lightly suggesting that Leonid can simply head along home now. Leonid suddenly reaches forward with a swift grab and catches her hand tightly. He loudly shouts out a passionate denial, firmly declaring that her assumption is completely wrong. Our guy slowly releases his grip. He turns away slightly and quietly admits that it is true he is not qualified to worry about her, leaving a thoroughly stunned Elizabeth to stare at him in disbelief while wondering what he could possibly mean. She admits that Leonid's words do not make complete sense, but somehow she understands his perspective anyway. Pointing her finger upward, she tells him that in that case, he should go up there. Elizabeth explicitly instructs Leonid that he can watch directly from the very top of the bell tower. She explains that up there, he will be able to stay on guard duty effectively without being seen by anyone at the wedding. Leonid turns around and steps through the doorway, confirming that he has got the message. He confidently tells Elizabeth to leave the guarding duties entirely to him. Our girl waves her hand with a bright smile, cheerfully thanking him as he departs. At the same time, she wonders internally if she simply imagined it, noting that somehow Leonid seemed happy even though she had just gotten rid of him. A loud shut sound echoes as the wooden door closes firmly. Elizabeth lets out a tired sigh, reflecting with closed eyes that at least they have successfully gotten one thing settled for now. She remembers how Leonid was holding her hand. Our girl begins to wonder if there might be even the slightest chance that something else motivated his concern. Elizabeth ponders if he was actually worried that the eloping couple might try to do something harmful to her. She immediately dismisses the idea in absolute silence, firmly telling herself that there is absolutely no way that could be true. She reflects on the original game, noting that even the princes who were perfectly attuned to the heroine's every emotion showed not even the smallest sign of believing or realizing that she was innocent, concluding it is way too much to hope for such insight from that muscle-brained head knight. She lets out a stressed groan and clutches her head, venting that the sudden thought brought back incredibly bitter memories of her past life as a noble lady. She quickly shakes off the frustration, firmly reminding herself that she is free now as Sister Elizabeth and resolves to hold it together so she can make sure the wedding turns out completely perfect. The solemn sounds of a pipe organ echo beautifully throughout the grand cathedral. A choir of local village children stands together with clasped hands, singing a joyful tune to welcome the couple down the aisle. Guided by the musical blessing, Claude and Rosetta walk side by side toward the altar where the church sisters stand ready. Rosetta looks stunning in her decorated white bridal dress and long flowing veil as she links arms with Claude. Claude glances down at his bride with a tender smile, prompting a deeply moved Rosetta to look back at him with happy tears in her eyes. Standing together at the altar, Moritz begins the official wedding vows. He asks Claude if he takes this woman to be his wife and love her for as long as they both shall live, receiving a firm confirmation, before asking Rosetta the identical vow as she tearfully pledges her lifelong commitment. Moritz lifts a holy symbol with his hand to deliver the final blessing. With the goddess Helvela serving as their official witness, he proudly pronounces them husband and wife and instructs the groom that he may now kiss the bride. Claude gazes lovingly into the eyes of Rosetta as he gently cradles her face. Elizabeth watches the affectionate scene with a gentle smile. She reflects internally that it had previously crossed her mind that because it was an elopement, Princess Rosetta might have simply dragged Claude along against his will, but concludes with relief that it seems she completely lacked any reason to worry. Rosetta wipes away her tears as Claude speaks softly to comfort her, gently telling her not to cry. Our girl continues to reflect that surely there has been a great deal of drama between the two of them that she does not know about, but they have clearly grown and successfully formed a powerful bond together. Elizabeth crossly folds her arms and smiles knowingly, thinking to herself that to have only the hardest route lead directly to a happy ending makes her really admire Princess Rosetta as a true heroine. She notes with a bit of stress that unlocking this specific conclusion must take at least 3 full playthroughs, but points out that the perspective looks completely different from the viewpoint of the actual villainess of that 3rd playthrough. She presents a large, decorated dessert on the table and announces the next official step of the ceremony, politely instructing the newlyweds to please feed one another a bite of the pie. She addresses the bride directly with a warm expression, humbly noting that it is not much, princess, but it serves as their special celebration. Claude smiles warmly while holding a slice of pie on his fork, understanding the custom. Elizabeth calmly explains to the couple that the act of feeding each other signifies they will never let each other go hungry. Princess takes a bite and begins to chew, her eyes lighting up in sudden amazement as she tastes the treat. She covers her mouth in pure astonishment, instantly recognizing the specific flavor. She reflects that the food tastes exactly like the pie her mother used to make out in the countryside, noting with surprise that it is stuffed with the same mixture of walnuts, apples, and plums. Stunned by the perfect match, a wide-eyed Rosetta turns back to ask Elizabeth how she could possibly know that exact recipe. Elizabeth simply smiles knowingly and defers to a holy explanation, reassuring the bride that the goddess Helvela knows everything. Elizabeth smugly thinks to herself that she actually knew the recipe because no matter what character route she had taken back in the Princess Dawn game, Rosetta always ended up making the exact same pie. Multiple game screens flash through her mind showing the princess proudly declaring that this is her mom's recipe and the only pie she knows how to make. The newly married couple stand happily at the main entrance gates as the local villagers gather to cheer them on. Elizabeth approaches the bride to hand over the finalized marriage paperwork, politely presenting the documents to Rosetta. The happy princess takes the papers with a gentle smile and offers a warm word of gratitude in return. Meanwhile, up in the high stone arches of the bell tower, a silent Leonid leans against the railing next to the massive ringing bells, dutifully keeping watch over the entire area just as he promised. Leonid reflects silently from his watch post, noting to himself that it seems the indoor part of the ceremony is officially finished. He continues to observe the scene closely, wondering if there is still something else they have left to do. Our guy watches the large gathering outside as the wedding guests surround the newlyweds in a wide circle. Suddenly, Rosetta turns her back to the crowd, prompting a sharp, alert look from Leonid as he notices the sudden shift in action. Leonid immediately senses danger, panicking internally that the situation is bad because Rosetta is actively throwing an object. Fearing an attack on Elizabeth, he calls out her name in alarm. Elizabeth successfully catches the object, only to realize it is a beautiful bridal bouquet filled with lilies and roses. Falling flower petals float gently through the air around her, leaving a thoroughly stunned Leonid to freeze mid-air as he blankly realizes that the thrown weapon was simply a bunch of flowers. He stares down intensely at Elizabeth, who is left holding the bridal bouquet in complete surprise under the floating flower petals. She stares down blankly at the flowers, uttering a soft word of confusion as she tries to understand what just happened. She looks up with a sweating expression and notices Rosetta standing right before her, suddenly realizing that this bouquet was given to her intentionally. Rosetta cheerfully declares that she wanted Elizabeth to have the bouquet, offering a sincere apology for everything that has happened in the past and warmly thanking her for making today's ceremony possible. Elizabeth blushes slightly and mutters a nervous word of thanks, completely caught off guard by the kind gesture. Standing together in the shimmering light, Claude and Rosetta share a warm embrace, prompting the final narration to reflect that they truly are the perfect couple. Sitting alone on the stone floorboards, Leonid turns his head slightly in response as a child loudly calls out for the Sir Knight. Two local village children happily present a large dessert tray to Leonid, excitedly announcing that the helpers get to eat the do-overs. The boy proudly explains that although Sister Elizabeth burned it a little bit, they brought it over for him, prompting a surprised Leonid to softly mutter in acknowledgement. Leonid sits on the floorboards and quietly eats a piece of the dessert while listening to the children talk. Holding her face in her hands, the young girl sighs happily that the princess was incredibly pretty and enthusiastically declares that she wants to be a bride herself someday. The young girl turns to the group with wide eyes and explains the tradition, stating that whoever catches the bouquet will be the next to become a bride. The reminder causes Leonid to pause mid-bite with a startled expression as the image of Rosetta's shimmering wedding dress flashes vividly through his mind. The children wonder aloud if this tradition means Sister Elizabeth will be the bride next time, with the girl playfully adding that she is quite jealous. Meanwhile, a heavily blushing Leonid keeps his eyes shut tightly, chewing on his food in complete silence. Tony yells out in disbelief, calling the idea stupid and firmly pointing out that church sisters cannot get married. The sudden declaration leaves a heavily sweating Leonid completely wide-eyed in shock, prompting a kid to softly mutter a question regarding whether that is truly the case. The tense announcement causes our guy to break into a violent fit of coughing as he tries to process the information. Standing nearby, Matt quickly addresses the other boy, stating that his claim is not entirely true, while the young girl watches the knight nervously and asks if he is doing all right. Matt breaks down the distinct rules of the church, enthusiastically explaining that novices are actually allowed to get married. A visual diagram details that a novice wears a short veil while a full sister wears a long veil, allowing Matt to confidently conclude that Sister Elizabeth can still successfully become a bride. Matt continues sharing his knowledge, adding that if people are simply staying at the convent until they reach a certain age, they are completely fine to marry as well. Deeply impressed by the explanation, the other children praise Matt for knowing absolutely everything, while a sweating Leonid covers his face and lets out a soft cough in silence. The young girl reacts in surprise, noticing a sudden and dramatic shift in the knight's demeanor. She remarks that Leonid looks incredibly happy all of a sudden and wonders if the pie was truly that delicious, prompting the other children to agree that he is in a fantastic mood and note that if he were always like this he wouldn't be nearly as scary. The following day, Rosetta leans out of a moving carriage window, waving enthusiastically to offer her heartfelt thanks to everybody. As the vehicle rolls down the dirt path, she cheerfully calls out her wishes to see them again someday, while a visual close-up highlights the sparkling wedding rings worn by the newly married couple. The church sisters stand together in a row along the grassy hill, quietly watching the departing guests leave the premises. Reflecting on the dramatic events, Lucinda marvels with a bright expression that Rosetta really was quite something. Standing right next to her, Roxanne fields a sweating glance and calmly adds that the princess was unique in a number of entirely different ways, while Elizabeth walks quietly along the background path. Our girl looks back over her shoulder. She addresses the silent trees directly, calmly announcing that the visitors have officially left and stating that it is completely okay to come out now. Leonid makes a quiet appearance from behind a thick tree trunk, stepping out into the open path where Elizabeth is waiting. Our girl continues to look up at Leonid as they stand together. Elizabeth closes her eyes with a quiet smile, deeply reflecting on the head knight's true nature. She wonders honestly to herself whether he is genuinely straightforward or just incredibly stubborn, concluding that either way, she still hasn't completely figured him out. She looks back toward the path and speaks aloud, warmly reflecting on how happy the two newlyweds looked during their ceremony. She confidently notes that while Prince Claude may not always look completely reliable, she is entirely sure he will do a wonderful job protecting Princess Rosetta from now on. Beside her, a sudden look of sharp realization hits Leonid as he quietly utters a soft exclamation. Leonid vividly remembers the day he left the royal castle, recalling how Elizabeth stood with her back turned while firmly stating that his assumption was correct. He remembers the royal officials frantically ordering him to hurry up and go because the king was calling with an urgent summons, prompting a young messenger to desperately tug on Leonid's cape while pleading for him to please hurry. Overwhelmed by his internal reflections, his hand tightly forms a fist with a sudden clench. Inside a grand estate under a clear sky, Charlotte sits before a large vanity mirror inside her dressing room. Her personal maid stands attentively behind her, gently brushing through her long, light-colored hair. Looking off to the side, Charlotte lets out a soft, drawn-out sigh. She pouts her lips slightly, deeply wishing that she could have been there to personally watch the eloping couple get married at the church. The maid offers a reassuring smile, comforting her lady by noting that she will surely have another chance and that she will soon have her own turn to be the bride. Charlotte quickly turns her head back to argue that it simply is not as exciting that way, while the maid quietly observes her with an amused expression, thinking to herself that Elizabeth is really rubbing off on her. A sudden, sharp knocking echoes through the door, prompting another maid to enter the dressing room holding an envelope. She addresses the young lady politely, announcing that a letter has just arrived from the house of Baron Darina, while the lady and her primary hairbrushing maid turn to look back in surprise. Charlotte beams with immense excitement, her eyes sparkling brightly as she eagerly tears open the envelope. She happily reflects that the letter is from her mother after a long time apart, wondering to herself if her mother finally believes that she is feeling much better now. The maid playfully wiggles her shoulders and decides to take a look. Suddenly, Charlotte glances down in complete surprise as a sealed object drops from the letter. Outside in the bright courtyard, Elizabeth happily sweeps the ground with a large straw broom. Elizabeth joyfully calls out to the open sky, reflecting on how incredibly nice it is outside today. The narration notes that things around the church have been completely crazy ever since Roxanne returned home a few days ago. The narration explicitly notes that something definitely seems to be up with Roxanne. She happily sweeps the courtyard as she internally reflects that since Roxanne did not explain herself, she will choose not to press her for answers. Elizabeth smiles with closed eyes, excitedly changing her mindset by remembering that tonight is the highly anticipated meat festival. Suddenly, a dramatic voice loudly screams out her name from a distance. Charlotte suddenly slams both hands down onto the wooden table with a loud crash, startling the nun. A completely surprised Elizabeth turns around with her broom raised, questioning where Charlotte could have possibly come from and asking what the matter is, prompting a panicked Charlotte to desperately plead for Elizabeth to help her out. Charlotte begs Elizabeth to act as her official chaperone and accompany her directly to the upcoming ball. Elizabeth breaks into a nervous sweat and stares straight ahead in complete disbelief. She brings a thoughtful hand to her chin as she processes the details of the situation. She summarizes the problem, noting that a week from now there will be 3 separate balls happening simultaneously, and explains that as the daughter of Baron Darina, Charlotte is officially expected to attend one of them. Charlotte explains that her family only recently became nobles. Because of this, each family member is expected to attend an event to help promote their family name. The narration details that the specific ball Charlotte has been assigned to is hosted by the House of Viscount Pasolino, noting that while Elizabeth is not personally familiar with the nobles of the neighboring kingdom, a viscount is likely less of a priority when multiple major events overlap. Elizabeth reflects quietly from the side, thinking to herself that being a noble is tough no matter where someone goes. Charlotte gestures toward the open letter on the table, explaining that the request is a direct order from her mother, leaving her with absolutely no choice. She looks down nervously as she shares that her mother explicitly stated she will not tolerate any failure. Our girl flips the letter over to read it more carefully while resting a thoughtful hand against her chin. She reads the true meaning of the letter aloud, noting that success does not just mean avoiding mistakes, but actually requires going above and beyond to successfully connect with influential families. Sitting together at a round table under the shade of a tree, Elizabeth begins to analyze the details, starting by confirming if Charlotte has already made her official societal debut. Charlotte looks back attentively and confirms that she did make her debut through her parents' connections before she came to the village. She looks across, gently telling Charlotte that she is still young but clearly has it tough. Charlotte looks away, pouting slightly as she grumbles that somehow the nun's comment feels a bit aggravating. Our girl suggests that if she simply smiles at a ball and pretends everyone in the crowd is a pumpkin or a potato, she will easily make it through the night. Charlotte softly admits that she did actually try that exact strategy in the past. In a flashback, inside a grand, highly decorated ballroom with large glass windows, the air is filled with loud, continuous chatter and endless chit-chat. Standing completely isolated against a patterned wall between the large windows, a nervous Charlotte clutches her hands tightly close to her chest. Charlotte flinches in sudden distress as she overhears 2 nearby noblewomen mocking her from behind. Covering her mouth, one woman notes that Charlotte keeps nervously glancing around the room, while the other maliciously adds that she is just the daughter of a baron who bought his noble title. The cruel whispering continues to echo closely behind her, causing Charlotte to sweat heavily and groan in deep emotional discomfort. Suddenly, an unknown nobleman reaches out his hand toward her from the side. The young nobleman smiles warmly and addresses her, noting that she looks troubled and telling her not to be scared because he is happy to start a friendly conversation. The young man smoothly finishes his statement, declaring his willingness to converse with any kind of lady. Charlotte nervously lifts the edges of her dress to perform a polite curtsy, stuttering out that she is pleased to meet him. The young nobleman asks what her specific interests are. She happily smiles and announces that her interest is climbing trees. The nobleman bursts out with a harsh, mocking question, asking if she is for real. The surrounding noblewomen immediately begin whispering how embarrassing it is. Charlotte breaks into a heavy sweat, looking completely mortified as the crowd continues to mock her as vulgar and call her some kind of monkey lady. Tears well up in her eyes and her face turns entirely red as loud, mocking laughter echoes all around her. Back in the present courtyard, Charlotte tightly squeezes the fabric of her dress as she quietly admits that she simply cannot face that kind of situation again. Sitting across the table, a sympathetic Elizabeth softly calls out her name, recognizing the deep emotional pain behind her words. Charlotte suddenly looks up. She passionately states that if Elizabeth is right there with her, she truly thinks she can successfully do it. Our girl asks Charlotte why she would think that way. Charlotte leans forward confidently, responding that it is simply because of the nun's true nature. She looks forward with intense focus, confidently declaring to Elizabeth that she seems to be incredibly strong. Elizabeth ponders the statement in complete bewilderment, wondering how Charlotte arrived at that conclusion and realizing that this is how the girl truly views her. Our girl turns back toward the two maids standing nearby, suggesting that it might be much better for one of the attendants who are always by Charlotte's side to act as her chaperone instead. The two maids immediately close their eyes and shake their heads, flatly rejecting the idea. The maid speaks up with a serious expression, explaining that their low status makes them completely powerless at a noble gathering. Beside her, the primary maid shuts her eyes tightly and forcefully begs Elizabeth to please lend their lady her strength. Elizabeth sits at the table and raises a valid concern, questioning if bringing her along would only make things worse since she is known as the banished Villainess. Charlotte proudly smiles and places a hand on her chest, stating that her own reputation is already at rock bottom anyway, so everything will be perfectly fine. Our girl internally laments the girl's logic, questioning how Charlotte could possibly consider a rock bottom reputation to be fine. Charlotte leans across the table, as she argues that there is massive value in attending and pulling off a flawless performance. She wide-eyed begs Sister Elizabeth to please give her the courage she needs. Elizabeth reflects deeply on the unexpected request. The narration reveals her internal thoughts, noting that Charlotte might be unwittingly placing her trust in the behavior of Elizabeth's inner former duke's daughter, and admitting that she would honestly rather not associate herself any further with any of the nobles from her former life. Her internal monologue concludes the thought, revealing that she genuinely likes being relied upon, and questioning if it wouldn't be a bit odd if she simply chose to never interact with any nobles again. Elizabeth beams with a bright, cheerful smile and enthusiastically agrees to the request, noting that she has nothing else to do right now. She confidently declares that she will show everyone that no lady can ever beat Sister Elizabeth, proposing that between tomorrow and the day of the ball, they should start having lessons on how to act properly like a noble. Hearing this, Charlotte and her two personal maids cheer joyfully in complete celebration. The instruction takes place outside a grand stone estate with tall pillars, wide staircases, and lush flower bushes framing the front path under the open sky. Elizabeth watches the progress with a focused expression, calmly instructing the young lady to give it one more try. Charlotte looks down and lets out a tense gulp, trying her absolute best to mentally prepare for the next practice run. Charlotte clumsily grabs the edges of her formal dress to perform a curtsy. She stammers out her greeting, addressing the imaginary Viscount Pasolino and nervously offering her gratitude to him for inviting her today. A voice suddenly calls out to halt the practice, causing Charlotte to turn her head in surprise. Christheart steps forward with a helpful smile and raises his hand, advising her not to look down but to keep her back straight and put genuine feeling into the movement, explaining that even if she is nervous, she must truly think the words deep in her heart as she speaks. Charlotte reacts with sudden shock, as she addresses the newcomer as Count Clareras. She stammers out a frantic question, demanding to know exactly what he is doing here at the estate. Daniel places a heavy book directly on top of Charlotte's head. Clasping her hands together nervously, a sweating Charlotte looks up at him in confusion, quietly uttering his name. He offers a warm smile and explicitly instructs her to try to balance the stacked objects perfectly so they do not fall. He points out that the weight will naturally force her to maintain a straight posture. Charlotte wonders why absolutely everyone is getting involved. Our girl gives a playful wink, cheerfully declaring that the older generation has a firm duty to pass down their wisdom. Hearing the statement, a sweating Christheart smiles sheepishly and reminds her that they are actually from the exact same generation, adding that as a leader in Clareras, he simply cannot stand by idly when he sees someone in serious trouble while Daniel smiles warmly beside him. Deeply moved by the unexpected kindness and support from everyone around her, she softly stammers out her heartfelt thanks to the group. Charlotte balances a book on her head, but she wobbles unsteadily while holding the edges of her formal dress. Watching her struggle, Elizabeth speaks up directly to point out that she is still completely off-center. Nearby, Daniel performs a dramatically exaggerated curtsy with a stack of books balanced on his own head, prompting a sweating Christheart to smile sheepishly while Charlotte watches the display in complete shock. Our girl raises her hand to offer more guidance, explaining that she has heard Viscount Pasolino is exceptionally tall, so Charlotte needs to actively practice looking up much higher. Attempting the high-angle greeting, Charlotte lifts the front of her dress to curtsy and begins to express her gratitude. Suddenly, she lets out a terrified shriek as a menacing silhouette aggressively looms straight over her, revealing Leonid standing firmly with his arms tightly crossed. Elizabeth catches the fallen book, flatly declaring that the attempt was no good and instructing Charlotte to try it one more time. Meanwhile, Charlotte frantically wonders exactly when Sir Leonid managed to get here as the Silent Knight joins their practice session. Elizabeth adjusts the book back onto the young lady's head, advising her that it is always best to have a tasteful comment completely ready for conversation. She suggests standard pleasantries, explaining that she can say things like "your kind face puts me at ease," or "I'm deeply honored to be here today." Leonid glares ahead with an incredibly sharp, menacing scowl face. Charlotte forcefully grips her hair, sweating heavily as she panics that there is absolutely no way she can use that line on him. Elizabeth smiles brightly from the side, trying to make the process seem easy by reassuring her that it is not just flattery, and explaining that if she simply says it from the heart, it will naturally ring true. Our girl steps directly between the two, turning to Charlotte with a confident smile as she offers a live demonstration. She smoothly delivers the greeting by thanking him for having her today and warmly stating that his kind face puts her at ease. She looks up with an incredibly radiant smile, gracefully concluding that she looks forward to a truly beautiful night. Elizabeth turns back with a playful wink, confidently reassuring Charlotte that all she has to do is look at him and smile a little more just like that, promising her that she will do fine. She silently reflects that the knight looks like he just died and went straight to heaven. Christheart looks over in mild concern and urgently tells Leonid to breathe, noticing that the head knight has completely started to hyperventilate. Our guy keeps his arms firmly crossed, sweating as he methodically tries to inhale and exhale to steady himself. She leans in closer, quietly reminding Leonid that he knows the statement is just flattery and pointing out that his face never actually looks kind anyway. He sighs that people will easily get the wrong impression, prompting an intensely blushing Leonid to quickly turn away and grumble that he has absolutely no idea what Christheart is talking about. Charlotte realizes that if she does not master this posture lesson soon, the knight is probably going to explode. Moving the preparation inside the dressing room, Elizabeth cheerfully announces that it is finally time to choose a dress, suggesting they select something prim yet showy enough to completely stave off any snide comments from the other nobles. The freckled maid looks on with closed eyes and confidently tells her to leave it to them as she gathers various fabric options near the open wardrobe. Charlotte begins a series of dress trials, starting with a first attempt that Elizabeth judges to be modest but entirely ineffective as an evening dress, noting that a proper gown ought to show off the collarbone with a lower cut. For the second attempt, Charlotte tries a strapless gown decorated with roses, but she shivers uncomfortably and complains that it is actively slipping down, prompting Elizabeth to consider using a corset to emphasize her chest before quickly concluding that it is far too soon for that style. She yells at Elizabeth, insisting that since they are going together to the ball, the nun needs to wear a formal dress as well. Elizabeth holds a piece of fabric in her hands, looking back at her as she tries to process the sudden demand. The maid enters the room with a smile. She announces that she has collected a bunch of dresses in the nun's size for her to try on. Elizabeth recoils in panic, waving her hands and stammering that she absolutely cannot do that. She continues to insist, tossing the nun's clothing aside and firmly commanding her to stop making excuses and get changed immediately. Elizabeth finally throws her hands up in defeat, telling her that she understands and will comply with her wishes. The maid struggles to fasten a dress around Elizabeth, as she notices that the waist does not fit correctly. Elizabeth winces and apologizes as the fabric makes a clinking sound. She admits that she has felt so free since coming to this place, leading her to eat quite a lot recently. Behind her, the freckled maid aggressively pulls the corset strings with all her might, flatly stating that the nun's excuses are completely futile while the primary maid watches the intense struggle in utter shock. Elizabeth completely collapses forward, desperately crying out in sheer defeat that she surrenders. Late into the night under a star-filled sky, the fitting session continues inside the glowing estate. A flurry of overlapping comments echoes through the dressing room as they review various options, with voices questioning if a specific dress will do, dismissing one choice as far too showy, rejecting another as too avant-garde, and jokingly noting that a particularly scary option might ensure absolutely no one approaches her, before finally finding a selection that looks exceptionally good. The day of the ball finally arrives. A horse-drawn carriage clatters loudly along the stone pathway outside the grand estate. Stepping out of the vehicle, a beautifully dressed Elizabeth walks side by side with a nervous Charlotte, both elegantly styled in stunning formal evening gowns as they prepare to enter the event. Elizabeth declares to herself that it is officially time to go back to being a noble lady for just a little bit. Elizabeth looks out from the side, observing the massive venue. Inside the main ballroom, a massive, brilliant chandelier hangs from the high patterned ceiling, illuminating a grand double staircase. Nearby, a beautiful vase filled with fresh lilies rests on a stone pillar, while a well-dressed noble couple close by covers their mouths while laughing softly during their conversation. Walking up the grand stone staircase, Elizabeth adjusts to the familiar surroundings, reflecting internally that it has been quite a long time since she last spent time among high-ranking nobles. Our girl carefully looks over the ballroom decorations, noting to herself that the floral arrangements are completely checked. Continuing down the steps with a light clack sound, she and Charlotte walk toward a long buffet table filled with various dishes, where a server stands holding a tray of drinks to welcome the arriving guests. The banquet table features a selection of finely prepared dishes, including sliced savory meats, rice dishes topped with mushrooms and olives, and various appetizers. Elizabeth observes the selection and notes internally that the beverages and hors d'oeuvres are all successfully checked. Our girl smiles, thinking to herself that if she could develop a modern chocolate fountain here, it would surely sell very well. A live orchestra performs for the gathering, consisting of musicians playing violins, woodwinds, and a double bass. Elizabeth assesses the music and checks off the orchestra in her mind, noting that they are successfully providing nice, pleasant background music that does not draw too much attention to itself. She notices a piano player performing at the base of the staircase, observing the grand instrument carefully. Elizabeth notes to herself that the event is quite well done for a viscount. Her sensibilities as a former duke's daughter tell her that even though two other major noble events are happening simultaneously tonight, some well-known nobles will definitely choose this specific ball, while ambient laughter and pleasantries echo through the room. She rests a finger on her chin, thinking to herself that Viscount Pasolino did a great job organizing the event. Suddenly, a voice calls out her name from nearby. Charlotte runs over to Elizabeth, happily announcing that her official greeting went well. Elizabeth waves her hand and warmly praises her success, telling Charlotte she did a great job and noting she saw the performance, though she quietly admits to herself that she only actually watched the beginning. She pouts her lips. She points out that Elizabeth did not watch her greeting until the very end and firmly reminds the nun that since she is acting as her chaperone, she needs to properly do her job. Elizabeth breaks into a nervous sweat and covers her mouth. She agrees to stick close to Charlotte from now on, internally admitting to herself that she completely got caught neglecting her duties. Elizabeth and Charlotte walk together across the ballroom floor, surrounded by other noble guests. Several noble guests begin to whisper among themselves, wondering aloud if they have seen Elizabeth before and questioning who she might be. Charlotte smiles happily with her eyes closed, cheerfully pointing out to Elizabeth that everyone in the hall is incredibly interested in her. Standing beside the young lady, our girl offers an awkward, nervous laugh in response. Charlotte suddenly startles and cuts her sentence short as she looks across the room. Her expression shifts to concern when she spots two specific noblewomen sitting on a sofa and quietly whispering to one another. An anxious Charlotte looks up and quietly notes that those two women were present at her last social event. Addressing her directly, Elizabeth confidently pokes her own cheeks to demonstrate a perfect smile. She warmly reminds Charlotte that she personally taught her how to properly smile like a noble, reassuring the young lady that she is completely invincible today because she is standing right by her side. Charlotte flashes a wide, blushing smile and asks Elizabeth to dance with her if she starts turning into a wallflower. Standing beside her, our girl replies that doing so would be bad for Charlotte's image. A visual definition describes a wallflower as a woman who stays near the wall at a social gathering, passively waiting without an invitation to dance. Visualizing herself standing awkwardly against the patterned wallpaper, Elizabeth notes internally that it is a really tough situation because a person starts to feel completely invisible. Elizabeth wonders if she should tell Charlotte to act more outgoing if that happens to her, but quickly decides against the idea to avoid sounding like she is lecturing. She looks across the room at a pretty young woman standing alone against the wall in a ruffled dress. She reflects internally that it is hard to get someone to talk to you if you simply stand there doing nothing, just like that girl. Elizabeth suddenly pauses with a look of surprise and softly tells Charlotte to wait, prompting a confused reaction from the young lady. Staring closely at the solitary girl by the wall, she begins to recognize her identity and mutters an exclamation of utter shock. A clear visual connection overlays the nervous girl in the evening gown directly with the image of Roxanne in her church sister habit. Sweating heavily under the sudden observation, a highly uncomfortable Roxanne stutters nervously as she tries to speak. Under a dark, starry night sky, Roxanne sits outside on a garden bench with a sad expression. She explains that she comes from a count's family that nearly fell into ruin. Looking down, Roxanne apologizes to the others for not saying anything about her past. Elizabeth and Charlotte sit right beside Roxanne on the bench near the building. Our girl smiles warmly and reassures Roxanne that she does not need to apologize. Elizabeth explicitly states that she could easily tell there was a reason why Roxanne left. Charlotte excitedly remarks that underneath her church uniform, Roxanne was actually a count's daughter all along. Roxanne explains that her situation is actually not that complicated. She states that her oldest sister and her husband went to one ball, and her other sister went to another. She notes that as the third daughter, she was simply sent to this specific gathering. Elizabeth looks ahead with a serious expression and thinks to herself that every family has a tough situation. Our girl smiles gently and tells Roxanne that it will be lonely at the church without her. Roxanne explains that she will come back to the church soon. She states that since her second sister is not married off yet, she will stay at the convent to protect her modesty until that happens. Charlotte looks at her and asks what modesty means. Elizabeth coughs awkwardly into her hand. Our girl explains that a female-only convent prepares a nun to be an ideal bride, noting that this is at least one of the major selling points. Charlotte bluntly asks if that simply means it ensures virginity. Sweating heavily at the girl's lack of hesitation, Elizabeth nervously confirms the fact, internally noting that she had actively tried to talk around the direct subject. Charlotte looks up in confusion and points out that there are actually quite a few men around the church. A visual breakdown reviews the men, determining that Maurice does not count, Christhart and Daniel are safe observers, but Leonid is entirely inappropriate as a stalker. A sweating Elizabeth stammers that keeping up noble appearances is all that matters, while Roxanne watches the exchange in silence. Our girl declares that they should not waste their precious time gossiping and promises to act as a proper chaperone to ensure they both have a wonderful evening. Charlotte throws her arm up in a cheerful celebration. Elizabeth observes the crowded room and notes that Viscount Pasolino and his wife would normally introduce them to the other guests. She looks toward a socializing couple nearby and concludes that the hosts are completely occupied at the moment. She asks Charlotte and Roxanne if neither of them knows anyone else here. She advises the girls that at a ball like this, they can work on building even the slightest connection. She reassures them that they are both very cute, stating that no one will think poorly of them as long as they make a proper greeting. She notes that beyond that, everything is simply up to chance. Charlotte mentions that she heard her oldest sister's friend would be at the event. Roxanne adds that her father's business partner might also be present, explaining that she knows his face because she used to play at his house. Listening to the ideas, Elizabeth happily agrees and suggests they start looking for them. A young nobleman walks up to the two noblewomen sitting on the nearby sofa. He bluntly announces that he is offering to dance with them, telling them that either of them is fine and commanding them to come along. The two seated women look extremely uncomfortable and nervous under the sudden demand. The blonde woman breaks into a sweat and stammers an excuse, claiming that her ankle is sprained. Sitting right beside her, the dark-haired woman covers her mouth and stutters that she is not feeling well. The nobleman erupts in anger and loudly orders the women not to lie. He angrily demands to know if they are trying to make a fool of him, causing the terrified women to let out a fearful squeak. The two seated noblewomen look visibly distressed and afraid. The narration points out a harsh reality, noting that unmarried women are completely powerless in noble society. Elizabeth watches the tense scene. She thinks to herself that those girls were also acting as wallflowers and notes that the nobleman made advances on them even though he could clearly see he was unwanted. She begins to tell Charlotte that they ought to help, but her sentence trails off. Elizabeth calls out her name in surprise as she and Roxanne watch the young lady bravely step into the conflict. Charlotte directly addresses the two frightened women. Standing right in front of the angry nobleman, she confidently announces that she brought anti-anxiety medications and non-slip shoe pads. She explicitly tells the women that this means they can safely get out of there. The nobleman clicks his tongue and glares furiously at Charlotte. He harshly insults her as the Baron's monkey daughter and aggressively demands that she not get in his way. Charlotte smiles confidently at the nobleman and points out that it would be a shame if a rumor started spreading that the Baron's monkey daughter had turned down his advances. She maintains her confident smile. Faced with her fearless attitude, the frustrated nobleman breaks into a nervous sweat and stammers as he completely backs down. The defeated nobleman turns his back to the group and retreats, quietly muttering that he does not feel very well. The two seated women watch him leave before the dark-haired woman addresses their rescuer directly as Lady Charlotte. The dark-haired woman smiles warmly and sincerely thanks Charlotte for helping them. Beside her, the blonde woman blushes slightly and offers a genuine apology for an incident that happened a year and a half ago, leaving Charlotte to look back with wide, surprised eyes. Watching the sweet exchange from a short distance away, Elizabeth and Roxanne share a warm smile. Charlotte crosses her arms and closes her eyes, blushing as she stammers out that everything is completely fine. Charlotte smiles brightly with her eyes closed. She cheerfully states that the goddess Helvela forgives all past transgressions while a vision of the holy statue appears gracefully behind her. Roxanne adds that she is afraid of how Charlotte will turn out if she takes after the nun much more. A completely shocked Elizabeth breaks into a heavy sweat and awkwardly agrees. She nervously admits that she will have to tell the young lady to stop, realizing internally that her own personality is definitely rubbing off on her. An older gentleman with a monocle approaches Charlotte alongside an older woman. The gentleman praises her as a brave young lady, explaining that she has taken a massive weight off their shoulders. The older woman smiles warmly and adds that the man Charlotte chased away was actively causing them trouble. Charlotte smiles brightly and gestures directly toward Elizabeth. She happily explains to the older couple that her success is all thanks to her great teachers both here and back at home. The older nobles deduce that the chaperone is the key to Charlotte's impressive behavior. They immediately ask Elizabeth for her teaching rates so they can send their own daughter to her. The nobles mention hearing a rumor that Elizabeth was formerly a duke's daughter from the neighboring kingdom, noting that she does not look like she has come to ruin. A sweating Elizabeth completely freezes in shock. Elizabeth never thought she might be looked upon favorably at a ball. A flustered Elizabeth desperately tells the young lady to stop, silently reflecting in disbelief that even the banished Villainess can successfully become the life of the party. Our girl wonders internally if this unexpected turn of events is happening because the story no longer controls them. A sudden hush falls over the grand ballroom under the glowing chandelier, causing Elizabeth, Charlotte, Roxanne, and the surrounding guests to look around in surprise. Charlotte looks around nervously and asks Elizabeth what is going on. A low murmur sweeps through the gathered crowd as the guests turn their attention toward the grand stone pillars, alerted by the rhythmic click of approaching footsteps. Michelle walks confidently down the grand staircase, stepping into the ballroom with a calm and gentle smile. Several female guests blush heavily and cover their mouths in absolute shock as the newcomer approaches. The women exclaim in utter disbelief that the prince has arrived, marveling that they never thought he would actually be here. Standing nearby, Elizabeth realizes internally that she was definitely meant to come to this specific ball. Several noblewomen blush and squeal with excitement. They happily note that Prince Michel is not even engaged and is probably looking for a partner, declaring it their lucky day. Michel walks past the murmuring crowd with a polite smile. Elizabeth stares at him with wide eyes and breaks into a nervous sweat, frantically trying to process the sudden appearance of Prince Michel. A vision of the game's heroine cheerfully exclaiming the prince's name flashes through Elizabeth's mind. The official game box for Princess Life appears in the background, displaying Michel alongside the other main characters of the story. Our girl watches the young man closely and notes to herself that it absolutely has to be him because his face is far too familiar. Michel steps forward with a rhythmic click of his shoes, walking directly toward a completely stunned Elizabeth. Michel steps forward and offers a soft chuckle. He warmly greets Elizabeth by name, while she reflects internally that in the original game, He is the first prince of the Remisa kingdom and is officially destined to become engaged to Elizabeth Fontini. Michel addresses Elizabeth directly, stating that he has come all the way to her kingdom to find her. He apologizes for taking so long to locate her even though she has been so close, while the surrounding noblewomen swoon and shriek in excitement. He looks intently at Elizabeth and smiles gently, telling her that he has kept his promise and has not gotten engaged to anyone. Michel softly whispers that he has finally found her. He reaches up and gently touches her chin as their faces move closer together. Daniel helps Leonid dress in a formal coat while they prepare inside a room at the estate. Outside, the grand building stands tall against the dark, starry night sky. Christheart tugs on his formal collar and instructs Leonid on how to handle the situation. He tells the knight that if a lady is in trouble, he should simply say that she is his partner and then stylishly remove her from the scene. Christheart flicks a piece of paper and asks Leonid if he is listening. Leonid sits quietly with a serious, unreadable expression. He tells Leonid that he has a reputation to uphold and asks him to do him a favor by not drawing any negative attention. He reminds Leonid that his rank is equal to a count's, so he needs to act accordingly. He shouts at the silent knight to ask if he is hearing him. Christheart waves an official invitation from Viscount Pasolino in front of Leonid. Christheart explains that it took a lot of effort to get them both invited to the event. He tells Leonid that they should act like close friends today and requests that the knight call him Chris. Daniel adjusts Leonid's jacket, noting that it feels tight on the chest and suggesting they leave it open instead. Leonid stands up and tells Christheart that they should go. Behind them, he and Daniel sigh in defeat, while Daniel tiredly wishes them a safe and pleasant trip. Elizabeth stands amidst the lively social gathering. Meanwhile, in a separate location, Leonid marches purposefully with a resolute look, clearly heading toward the venue where the ball is being held.